181. Stabbed the senior's waist. Neville, Harry, and Ron were supposed to hold Tom off, delay him long enough, but the real firepower in the six-person group lay with Ted. Their objective was simple: kill the basilisk. Tom understood that the basilisk was his greatest strength and his linchpin. Ted understood it too. Tom's current body was practically invulnerable, so wasting effort on him was pointless. The basilisk, however, could be destroyed, and if it died, Tom's resurrection plan would collapse. While spells flashed back and forth on the other side of the arena, Ted's corner was already in a brutal fight. This wasn't two schoolboys trading hexes. This was a full-on struggle for survival. The basilisk had gone berserk, rampaging through the arena like a runaway earth mover, smashing everything in its path. It even tore scales off its own flank, single-minded in its pursuit of destruction. Ted threw everything he had at the beast. A gravity ball, blue, pinned it down for 5 seconds, but on a monster that size, even added gravity was only a temporary restraint. He followed with chasing snowball, green, recirculating spiked frisbee, green, wobbling tiger, green, moonstone, green, anything that might interfere. Earlier, he'd used a counterfeit lucky coin, green, on Hermione, boosting her maximum magic by 20% for 3 minutes. Hermione spent that bonus on a desperate transfiguration. She cast at a massive stone snake sculpture and, by sheer force of will, animated it. The sculpture moved, unimaginably awkward, a slow, clumsy imitation of life. If Professor McGonagall had done it, it might have fought, but Hermione's stone serpent could only pounce in a grotesque, halting way. The basilisk, starved for a target, descended on it with terrifying speed and crushed it within 30 seconds. Hermione slumped against the wall, pale, drinking a potion brewed with magical spring water produced by a modified water-making spell. She'd help all she could, but against a beast like that, she had bought them only 30 seconds. Ted had already summoned a troll and an earth golem. To anyone else, they'd be titanic. Next to the basilisk, they were children. Firecracker bores dissipated on contact. The basilisk barely registered them. The dragon fireworks, however, caught its attention. It launched and bit into the display, only to crunch down on a mouthful of crackling sparks. That bought a moment. The earth golem seized it, wrapping its arms around the basilisk's tail and forcing it to the ground. The effort cracked the golem's body. It began to crumble into mud, cracks webbing across its form, but it pinned the tail as long as it could. The troll, safety helmet charm in place, smashed its club across the basilisk's head. One fang shattered with the blow, but the next instant it was coiled around, the basilisk's enormous coils crushing, squeezing. If the troll hadn't wedged its club to prop open the creature's jaw, it would have been swallowed. Even so, its bones groaned under the pressure. It wouldn't hold much longer. And this was while the basilisk was almost blind. Ted's trump card, though, was Chicken Bro. A rooster over 1.5 meters tall burst into being, brilliantly plumed and fierce-looking, crowing at the top of its lungs. The basilisk, which had almost squeezed the troll into pulp, instantly relaxed. Its whole underskin seemed to shift and bubble, forming pits and lumps as if something beneath the scales turned to liquid. It writhed, rolling on the ground in agony. The Slytherin-bred basilisk had some instinctive wariness of ordinary roosters. This one wasn't ordinary. Ted had raised Chicken Bro for 2.5 years, trained ruthless and cruel to deal with subterranean pests, and 3 earth-shattering crows later, the great snake was incapacitated. The troll broke free and pummeled the basilisk with 2 clubbed fists. The earth golem had paid the ultimate price and lay mud and rubble, but their combined effort finally put the beast down. On the other side, Tom had just sneered at Neville for nothing but vegetable growing and casually destroyed some plants with a gesture when a rooster's crow reached his ears. At the sound, his face went pale. He should have expected it. After all, he'd had Malfoy kill Hagrid's chickens, but the black goggles Longbottom and the others were wearing had told him they were prepared. They'd guessed the chamber's monster was a basilisk, and they'd brought a rooster. Tom pivoted. If the basilisk died, his resurrection plan was ruined. He had to go help it. But Neville and Harry weren't going to let him leave Ted's side. Harry surged forward using a foot-greasing charm, a gust at her back propelling her so fast she left after images. Neville had upped himself with an engorgement charm, puffed and huge, roaring as he charged. He hurled something straight at Tom's face. Tom's combat sense was far sharper than the youth's. He tilted his head to avoid the thrown object. Instead, an explosive white light detonated right in front of him, bleaching the world to white. Neville had thrown a fang dagger rigged with a flashbang effect, something Ted had crafted. Magic doesn't stand still. Tom, effectively 16 from 50 years ago, never expected such a trick. The flash filled his head until he staggered, seeing nothing. Harry didn't rush on blindly. She dove, grabbed Malfoy, already pale as a corpse, and tumbled them both behind a pile of rubble. From a pocket, she snapped out a scroll written in squid ink and slapped it onto Malfoy's forehead. It was a magic suppression scroll, designed to continuously dampen magical effects. Tom's power was feeding off Malfoy. The diary connected them, letting Tom siphon Malfoy's life and magic to manifest physically. As long as that link held, attacking Tom merely hurt Malfoy. Harry's scroll weakened that connection, made it tenuous. Tom was reeling from the flashbang. Harry had smothered the connection, and then a thin figure in a black robe darted forward from behind him. Jerry had waited for exactly this split second. He snatched up the fang dagger, the same blade that had detonated the flash, and with a quick, practiced twist plunged it into Tom's lower back. Jerry crowed, half triumphant, half hysteric. "Ah ha ha, it's me!" The dagger had been prepared for this. Evil protection plus fang spell, tuned to wound spiritual manifestations. Tom wasn't a normal body. He was a Horcrux entity, normally immune to ordinary attacks. The dagger didn't destroy him outright, but it pierced the veil. Tom's flesh went translucent and his form wavered. A scream tore out of him, something of pain and rage the boy at 16 had never known. Jerry dropped the dagger and bolted. "I'm out of here," he yelled as he ran. 182, Ron, don't die. Over there, the group's plan to exploit Tom's immaturity and arrogance finally landed a decisive blow. Meanwhile, Ted seized his chance. Under Chicken Bro's ceaseless crowing, the basilisk's muscles relaxed. Its flesh bubbled and tore as if ready to split. Most importantly, the beast had let down its guard. Ted quietly cast Predictive Insight, Blue, on himself to raise the odds of his sneak attack. He had prepared for this. A level 5 silent Sectum Sempra shot from his wand, arcing through the air, missing the basilisk's rolling body, and, with a delicate curve, striking the creature's only remaining good eye. Ted never trusted luck. If the eye might survive, he would make sure it didn't. When that last eyeball burst, Ted exhaled for the first time in ages. He could go all out. Ice Arrow Rain! Ted hadn't mastered Blizzard, the signature spell of an Azeroth magic user, but he could still fashion a clever Ice Arrow Rain. Over 10 arrows fired at once, puncturing 7 or 8 new holes in the basilisk. Thick, putrid black blood, poison scorched by Chicken Bro's crowing, spattered everywhere. Chicken Bro had done most of the damage. Sectum Sempra, Sectum Sempra, Sectum Sempra. 3 more Sectum Sempra spells cleaved 50-centimeter gashes into the basilisk. Even its scales couldn't stop them. Black blood ran in rivers. The scene was brutal. This, however, was Slytherin's pet, a 1,000-year-old basilisk. Despite all its flaws, it would not go down without a long, desperate fight. To finish it cleanly, Chicken Bro would have to crow for hours. But the basilisk refused to lie down. Once the damage reached a certain point, it realized it might not survive. Its survival instinct overcame its fear of chicken calls. Despite shredded flesh and searing rot, it turned on its pursuers. It was this boy. Kill him! Kill him! Ted cast Greased Souls on himself and slid 2 or 3 meters away, evading the basilisk's tail like an 80-yard battering ram. Boom! A stone pillar more than a meter thick split with long fissures where the tail slammed into it. It looked ready to fall. Knowing it was dying, the basilisk wanted to obey its last command, take them with it. Ted glided through the underground fittings, his feet skimming like an ice skater's. He casually turned the floor's ice into blades and spikes, littering the ground behind him. The basilisk tore through them, pursuit single-minded. It crushed ice and bit into its own scales, caring nothing for further injury. It could not see, and it did not care if it could feel. It only wanted to kill. Chicken Bro fled separately from Ted, flapping low and crowing pitifully. Cluck, cluck, cluck. Half terrified the giant snake would turn back for him. Blood began to seep from between the basilisk's scales, and the trail it left was a glaring smear of gore as it lunged after Ted. "Over here! Ted, over here!" Ron hissed, using Defendo at the same time. The spell brushed the basilisk like a warm wind and did nothing. Not a single scale cracked. Ron's face fell. It's useless. I'm useless. Ted took the moment to cast Restore Stamina, green, on himself, drawing some of his vigor back. Ron, get away! This snake's gone insane! But Ron's pride wouldn't let him stand down. If his spells could not touch the basilisk, there was always the environment, like when they'd fought the troll. Why not use transfiguration to make the surroundings into a weapon? He thought of the skidding jinx from earlier and acted. Ron focused on a piece of rubble nearly a meter across. He'd never tried so hard with a transfiguration in his life, and for once, the magic answered. Lockhart's cherrywood dragon heartstring wand felt uncannily smooth and obedient in his hand. The meter-wide rock shrank to the size of a basketball. Ron flicked his wand in a basic levitation movement and hurled the stone at the basilisk. Mid-flight, the transfiguration couldn't hold. The basketball swelled back to a 1-meter boulder and struck the basilisk with a thunderous duang. Black matter sprayed everywhere, flesh already turned into pus and blood by the crowing scattered. The basilisk was nearly severed at the waist. Its head thudded onto the floor. Ha! Yes! Ron whooped in triumph. Ted's relief lasted only a heartbeat. Oh no! Ron, look out! The basilisk reared and whipped its head. Snake vitality was mysterious. Sometimes a snake soaked in wine for a month could revive, and sometimes a chopped head could still bite. Ron hadn't expected the creature to be able to lash out like that. The massive jaws swung and lunged toward him. One bite could swallow him whole. Ah! Ted roared and poured spirit energy into a single, almost solid spike. A transparent spirit spike slammed into the basilisk's skull at an unanswerable speed. The tongue was almost at Ron's face when the snake shrieked and convulsed, thrashing its head. Ron was flung sideways. Even as he flew, Ron threw something, a glowing little wooden stick, his battered old wand. In desperation, he cast the one charm Tom had tried to teach him for a month without success, the explosive charm, with the wand everyone else would have thought useless. He hurled it into the basilisk's wide-open mouth. Boom! The beast's jaws detonated. Ted seized the chance and used a tenfold mage hand to pull Ron 5 or 6 meters away. Ron, are you all right? He panted, catching his friend's pale shoulders. Ron nodded weakly. My leg, it hurts. He clutched his thigh. The pain was intense from the blow. A thin trickle of dark blood ran down his arm to his leg. He looked at it and froze. A cut crossed his forearm more than 10 centimeters long, shallow, but bleeding dark and steady. Ted's forehead broke into sweat, but he kept his voice steady. He fished a small bottle of pale, bubbling potion from his bag and tipped it into Ron's mouth. Ah! 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 It tastes vile! Ron gagged, face paling further. It's an antidote, Ted said. Poisoned? Yes, but the antidote will buy you time. Sleep afterwards and it'll be fine. Ted's voice was soft. Oh, then, good. Ron's strength ebbed and he slipped into unconsciousness. By then the basilisk was at its last gasp. Tom had already retreated into the diary. The immediate battle was over. Ted called out, Neville! Neville, call for help! Neville came running, seeing Ron's limp form. Call who? He asked, uncomprehending. Ted's anxiety made his words break. Call for help! Call Dumbledore! Shout for him! Neville's face tightened. Dumbledore! Dumbledore! Someone! Please, someone save Ron! Their friends converged. Jerry staggered up, voice breaking. What happened to Ron? What happened to Ron? Tears choked his words. Ted stared down the tunnel, heartbeat drumming. Where is he? Hurry. A bright red light appeared down the path, moving at a fast clip. Relief hit Ted so suddenly he nearly collapsed. Hermione wrapped her arms around him without thinking. A fiery phoenix, bathed in a brilliant light, shot overhead. A hat fell from its claw and thumped onto Neville's head. He yelped as the brim slid and grazed his forehead. The phoenix, Fawkes, landed in front of Ron with a small series of piping calls. It bent down, rubbing its head against Ron's arm, and then let fall crystal-clear tears. Phoenix tears could cure any poison, even basilisk venom. Ted could feel tension drain out of him. Dumbledore had kept his promise. Fawkes's tears cleansed Ron's wound. Neville, Jerry, Hermione, and the others gathered closer, voices trembling with gratitude and exhaustion. Ted's heartstring finally loosened. For a moment, he allowed himself to breathe. Honestly, I'm a little worried some readers might think the protagonists made a mistake here. But this isn't a story about invincible heroes. Sometimes things go wrong, and sometimes you only survive because someone older and wiser keeps a promise. Ron's breathing gradually grew stronger and steadier. The weight in Ted's arms that had felt like a handful of ash disappeared. Color flooded back into Ron's cheeks. He was alive. Ted sat on the ground, ignoring the gravel and dust, and let out a long breath. He frowned, thinking, had his whole approach been too cautious? If he always played it safe, an accident could still leave him helpless. Maybe he should have been braver, pushed forward faster, raced his improvement against the unexpected. But there was no time for philosophy now. First things first. Neville had already reached into the sorting hat and pulled out a sword. Ted stared. The hilt was gold, the blade snow-white and crystalline, a faint chill running along it. Near the guard, intricate ancient runes were engraved into the metal, probably Gryffindor's name or emblem. The pommel was carved into a lion's head clutching a ruby. This was the Gryffindor sword. Cough, cough, gently, gently, you lot. Do you think an old hat can stand being shuffled around like that? The sorting hat complained as Neville fumbled it out. Neville, give me the sword, Ted said. Neville turned the blade, offering the hilt to Ted. He rubbed his head. He'd nearly been knocked senseless. How did a sword come out of the sorting hat? He asked. This is Gryffindor's sword, Ted said plainly. Gryffindor's sword, really? Hermione breathed. Ted moved toward the basilisk. Against all odds, the monster was not yet dead. Its vitality was monstrous. Most of its flesh had been ruined by the earlier chaos. The floor was slick with the creature's rotted flesh and dark blood, and Ted's Sectum Sempra had carved a dozen bloody rents into its body. Ron's wand blast had staggered it, but somehow it still twitched and gasped. Its mutilated head was roughly level with Ted's chest. Neville. Tell it that it's enough. Let it rest. Neville hesitated, a look of sorrow on his face. This was a basilisk raised by Slytherin, a creature that had guarded Hogwarts for 1,000 years. It had been forced to do terrible things under someone else's control, and now it was finally dying, just like the master who had vanished a millennium ago. Neville spoke in Parseltongue, a soft, hissing cadence that filled the cavernous silence. Enough. That's enough. You have done what your master asked. You may rest now. Sleep. There is no need to fight. The words carried a mournful finality. The basilisk, still fighting for breath, at last stilled, willing to let go. Ted raised the Gryffindor sword with both hands, aimed between the basilisk's eyes, and drove it downward. The scales that had defied ordinary blades parted as if they were paper. The sword pierced the creature's brain. Life left it instantly, without agony. Perhaps only Gryffindor's blade could kill Slytherin's creature so cleanly. 1,000 years of enmity unsnarled in an instant. The men were gone, the beasts expired, and the old traces began to fade. When Ted drew the sword free, a thin trickle of dark red blood ran from the tip onto the stone, and the blade remained unblemished. Then Tom's voice echoed through the chamber, laughing, manic. Ha! 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 I understand, I know why. So that's it. Ha ha! Ha ha ha! His form was now only a translucent upper torso, floating in the air, barely more than a voice. Ansu swooped down, snatched the diary, and carried it to Ted, dropping it at his feet. The promotion card had a side effect. Ansu was losing a lot of feathers. Hopefully they'd grow back. Laugh all you want, Ted barked. Tom's grin did not fade. I am immortal. I have proven it. You cannot defeat me because, I won't tell you. Go to hell. Ted thrust the sword down, pinning the diary beneath the blade. Ink spilled in a black deluge. No, Tom shrieked the most miserable sound he had yet made. Then the voice thinned to smoke and dispersed. Ding, killed the Millennium Basilisk. Reward, ding, destroyed Lord Voldemort's Horcrux. Diary, reward. Ding, quest completed, Slytherin's Chamber of Secrets. Red, reward. Ted crouched as if to inspect the cards that dropped, then casually collected them. He had no time to examine the colors closely, but they were vivid. His casual handling of the diary and the boss fight left the others stunned. Was it really over? Chicken Bro and Ansu were squaring off with Fawkes on the side. Whose territory is this? State your name, Chicken Bro demanded. Fawkes answered with a clear, melodious trill. Coo coo coo, Ted blinked. That didn't sound like the phoenix he expected. He let himself joke inwardly about wishing for an Ashes of Alar drop. If the phoenix's lifespan came to an end, could he have a pinch of ash? The sorting hat brightened. Well done, lads. A glorious victory. Gryffindor's sword proves its worth. And, unable to help itself, it began to sing. Ted had suspected all year that the old hat did nothing but daydream about music, and this confirmed it. Unfortunately, it was terrible. Jerry supported Ron's head so he wouldn't slump and complained to the Sorting Hat. "Can you please stop, or at least give us a break? Listening to you sing is like fighting two basilisks." "You youngsters have no taste," the hat retorted. "Gryffindor always loved my songs." Everyone exchanged an exhausted look. They'd had enough of the hat's ego. Climbing back up out of the chamber proved far harder than the descent. The way down had been gravity. The way up demanded muscle. They had all been drained by the battle, magic spent, bodies exhausted. Ted's potions and the handful of enchanted bread had only done so much. Two of their number were unconscious, Ron and Malfoy. Chicken Bro and Fawkes could carry people, which helped, though Ansu, now a molting raven, could not. They also had to deal with Professor Lockhart, who seemed intent on reinventing himself as a helpless child. He couldn't walk properly and fussed when tied to Chicken Bro's back, tugging at feathers until Chicken Bro pecked him, which made Lockhart howl. Ted finally gave him a sharp chop to the head to quiet him. Indeed, a sleeping Lockhart was a good Lockhart, and the professor slumped mercifully out of the way. When they emerged, Professors McGonagall, Snape, and Flitwick were already waiting. After a brief explanation, priorities were clear. Treat the injured. Malfoy had suffered severe loss of life force. Unless treated quickly, he might have lasting damage. Ron, while not in mortal danger, had been weakened by poison and would not wake soon. He was given potions and left under observation. Lockhart remained a problem. This was a school, not a nursery. Professor McGonagall, having heard Ted's account, did not scold the students for their audacity. There was no time. She moved quickly. "Contact the principal immediately," she ordered. "Get Dumbledore back here at once and inform the parents. We must control the narrative. Send word to the papers and the public. We can't remain purely defensive." She shot Ted a sharp look. "You stay here and watch these 3 patients. Do not go anywhere. I will contact the principal, don't worry." Ted was left to tend to the wounded while McGonagall reached out to Dumbledore, the Weasleys, and Lucius Malfoy. Parents needed to be notified. Outside, the world's old stories seemed to crackle anew. Where once an emperor cut a white snake to start a rebellion, now young Ted had taken Gryffindor's blade to cut the basilisk and lay waste to an ancient threat. The sky felt colder, the stars a little less secure. When a knife is sharpened in secret, the whole firmament shifts. The professors had gone back to work. The Chamber of Secrets had been cleared. The monster that had almost closed the school had been killed. The headmaster needed to be welcomed back, and parents and students who had left the castle had to be informed. There was still a great deal to do. The others were sent back to their dormitories to rest, though they would have liked to stay with Ron and Ted. Professor McGonagall clearly did not permit it. Madame Pomfrey, lips pursed and hands on her hips, held a large jar of potion as if daring anyone to make a fuss. Neville and Seamus immediately lost their courage and fled without looking back. Hermione told Ted to be careful and to rest, then returned to Ravenclaw Tower. It had been a long, brutal day. They had already lived through too much. First, there had been Hagrid and the story of 50 years past, then the visit to his hut that ended with them cornered by the Minister of Magic, Lucius Malfoy, and Dumbledore, watching Hagrid led away on false charges. They had followed Hagrid's shaky guidance into the Forbidden Forest and almost become spider food. Being chased by and fighting hundreds of Acromantula was frightening enough. Back at the castle, they learned that Draco had been taken by the Heir of Slytherin, and they'd forced Lockhart into taking them down into the Chamber of Secrets to rescue him. Only now, with it over, did the terror settle. Ted could still taste the basilisk's fishy scent in his nose, and the image of Tom Riddle, the young Lord Voldemort, haunted him. He was exhausted. Ted leaned against the headboard of his hospital bed and wanted nothing more than to sleep, but the night's business was not finished. The professors and the headmaster would be occupied for some time yet, and Ted still had one outstanding duty to perform. He produced a small bottle of Vitality Tonic, drank it, and forced himself to collect his wits. Fawkes the Phoenix could not be kept. He had already flown away, and the sorting hat had been reclaimed by Professor McGonagall. The Gryffindor sword remained in Ted's hand, though warmly so only until morning. It was one of Hogwarts' most treasured heirlooms. He could not keep it. In truth, he wasn't that attached to it. The sword bore a deep connection to Gryffindor. Its truth was that only a student or teacher of the school who had proven their courage could claim it, and Ted felt the sort of person to whom swords did not belong. If anything, Neville should be the one to wield it. There were legends about the sword, forged by ancient fairies who always insisted a maker maintained ownership of a thing. Those fairies had once tried to take it back and had been punished by Godric Gryffindor. Even now, many of them still argued ownership, and Ted had learned to roll his eyes at that sort of squabble. In the same vein, the basilisk had been Slytherin's legacy to the school, a weapon to be unleashed in the gravest of threats. Misfortune had it that the basilisk came under the command of Tom Riddle. Ted also had the diary in his bag, the one with the big hole threaded through it. Originally, it had been an ordinary Muggle diary, but after Tom Riddle had poured years of himself into it and turned it into a Horcrux, it was no longer simple. The Gryffindor sword had apparently destroyed it, but it still reeked of dense, malevolent magic. Ted knew he could not keep such a thing. It was stolen property and belonged to Dumbledore. In any case, that diary had been one of the safer Horcruxes. While it had a kind of consciousness, it lacked the convoluted, lethal protections that made other Horcruxes so dangerous. Tom had made it young, only a 5th year at the time, proof of a dark brilliance too early. The other Horcruxes were likely far worse. Ted's thoughts were still racing, about the diadem hidden in the Room of Requirement, about Borgin and Burkes and the dark experiments Tom had undertaken, about how Dumbledore had been the only one to see the scale of it, when Ron groaned in the next bed and woke. "Ron, you're awake. How do you feel?" Ted asked, moving to his friend's side. Ted, my bum hurts," Ron managed. In the Chamber of Secrets, he'd been struck by the basilisk, his left humerus fractured, his hip badly shaken, and half of him bruised purple. Of course it hurt. Ted tried to soothe him. "Don't worry, it's not that bad. Your behind was blown into the mouth of the Slytherin statue. It'll be fine. Madame Pomfrey can fix you right up." Ron's eyes widened as if they would pop out. The image, Slytherin eating his behind, proved too much. He fainted again. Ted allowed himself a small, relieved smile. Ron needed rest now, and this was the gentlest way to make sure he got it. No stupefy required. Meanwhile, in the headmaster's office, Dumbledore had returned. The Weasleys were there, anxious and pale, and Lucius Malfoy was near collapse. Lucius trembled, his long, pale gold hair disheveled, and stared at Dumbledore as if the man alone could undo what had been done. If anything happens to my son, I swear," he began, voice breaking. He regretted letting Draco stay at the school instead of taking him home. Nothing was more important than his son. He should never have risked him. Dumbledore, at over a century old, had seen too much to be ruffled. He spoke gently. "Lucius, please calm yourself. Do not be hasty." Then he offered the news everyone needed to hear. "Draco Malfoy is safe. Ronald Weasley is safe. You may relax." There was a collective sigh that sounded too much like someone's heart starting again. It was past midnight when the 3 parents filed into the hospital wing. Malfoy's house elf, Dobby, cowered outside the door with his head poking timidly in. Ted had expected them and had been waiting. He greeted the excited Weasleys and then stepped aside to watch them fuss over Ron. The boy was still muddled, but inwardly delighted. It had been a very long time since his parents had shown him such care. Draco, by contrast, lay in a heavy sleep. Lucius knelt, his hand trembling as he stroked his son's pale face and whispered his name. Tom Riddle had drained Draco for too long and too deeply. Recovery would not be immediate. Lucius, seeing no response, lost what remained of his composure. "To St. Mungo's! Take him to St. Mungo's!" he cried, trying to lift Draco. Madame Pomfrey stepped forward, firm and decisive. "Mr. Malfoy, put him down. He needs peace and quiet, not a carriage. He has lost too much life force. I have already given him restorative potions. He will wake within 3 days at the most." Lucius would not be persuaded and insisted on leaving. Dumbledore and Madame Pomfrey exchanged a helpless glance. Ted moved in before the situation could escalate. "Mr. Malfoy," he said, keeping his voice calm. "I'm Ted Epiphany. I'm Draco's classmate. We rescued him from the Chamber of Secrets. Ron was injured saving Draco." The Weasleys looked at each other, incredulous, and then at their son lying in the bed. Lucius blinked, unsure how to respond, and gratitude quickly followed. "Thank you, Epiphany," he said, his voice thin with relief. "Please allow me to repay you. I must take Draco to the hospital now." Ted raised a hand. "There's something you should know. It won't take 2 minutes." He drew the diary from his bag and shook it out, the terrible little book with its holes still visible. "Mr. Lucius, do you have anything to say?" Tom Riddle's diary had a large, dark hole burned through its center, as if something corrosive had eaten into the paper. That was the kind of damage the Sword of Gryffindor could do. Whenever it defeated something, it absorbed some of the foe's power. When Ted had used the sword to slay the basilisk, it had taken on the basilisk's venomous, destructive force, enough to pierce and burn the diary. Lucius Malfoy's expression tightened at the sight. This was the very diary he had given to Ginny Weasley, the key to opening the Chamber of Secrets. The whole scandal had blown up. His only son had been implicated and nearly killed, and now someone had the crucial piece of evidence in hand. He forced himself to breathe slowly, laid Draco carefully on the hospital bed, and nodded toward Ted. "Let's talk outside." Ted ignored the looks from Dumbledore and the Weasleys and was the first to leave the hospital ward. In a quiet corridor near a brazier, he stopped. Lucius followed, staring at the charred diary in Ted's hand, debating whether to snatch it. Dobby hovered a little way off, tense and watchful. Ted saw the change in Lucius's face and smiled, almost smugly. He could feel the swirl of thoughts and anxiety coming off the older man. The sensation made him cocky. "Mr. Malfoy," he said, shaking the diary, "you want this back badly, don't you? Go ahead and try." The Malfoy mask of aristocratic calm flickered. "You insolent! Do you think you can speak to me like that?" he snapped. But Lucius kept his voice controlled. "What do you mean by this? What is it? Do you intend to hand it over?" Ted's grin broadened. "Let's not waste time. Dumbledore's still in the ward. Make your choice." Lucius's hand rose, wand poised, and he cast a silent accio. He'd never been one to show off. He preferred influence and strategy, but he was no weakling. As a trusted subordinate of Lord Voldemort, he had power. The accio was precise. In Ted's estimation, Lucius was a formidable spellcaster. Yet the diary did not move. Color drained from Lucius's face. The brazier's flame jittered against his features as he demanded, "What exactly do you want?" He realized with a chill that this boy, this peer of his son, possessed a level of magical control he had not expected. Even if the diary's wielder had been careless, a well-aimed accio would have taken it. Even if defended, countering a silent accio like that was difficult, and yet Ted had done it. Lucius half believed he was facing an enchantment, half believed he was outclassed. "I'll meet your terms, whatever they are," he said, trying to sound magnanimous. "For Draco." Before Lucius finished, Ted flicked his wand from his ear to the space behind him and silently cast Petrificus Totalis. Dobby stiffened where he stood, frozen. Lucius's jaw tightened. He'd been playing a quiet maneuver while he spoke, subtle wand signals to the house elf to take advantage of the distraction. The diary could not be allowed to stay intact. But Ted hadn't even turned his head. He had sensed the ghastly move and immobilized the elf faster than Lucius could react. That was only part of it. Ted, open in every direction, seemed to reach into the thoughts of anyone within a wide radius. He carried with him a small spirit crystal servant called Parker that bolstered his awareness. Lucius felt as if the boy could see straight through his plans. For a man used to pulling strings from the shadows, the helplessness was unfamiliar and unnerving. He swallowed. His hand that clutched his wand trembled. "Sir," he began, and then bowed his head. The corridor was still school grounds. He could not openly fight. 2 failed attempts at secrecy, and the raw gap in power told him he had no cards left to play. Yielding, at least, was a Malfoy specialty when circumstances demanded it. "I surrender. Tell me what you want." Ted waved his hand in a casual, almost dismissive way. "Seems Mr. Malfoy tested me. All right, let's do this. Don't be nervous. After all, I'm Draco's classmate." Hearing his son named as a link, almost a hostage, made Lucius's throat work. The boy could be in the hands of someone like this. Ted's next move was disconcerting. He threw the diary toward Lucius. The old fox reflexively reached to catch it, then then pulled back, keeping his wand ready and his eyes locked on Ted. He had seen ambushes staged around such gestures dozens of times. The diary hit the stone floor and lay there. Ted didn't flinch. "Do you know what this is?" he asked. Lucius's eyes darted, grasping for a plausible lie. He couldn't admit its true purpose, could he, that it was the instrument Voldemort had entrusted to him to open the Chamber of Secrets? But Ted cut him off before he could spin anything. "When Lord Voldemort gave you this, what did he tell you? Could it open the chamber?" Lucius felt his stomach drop. The other boy knew far too much. He crouched, picked the diary up, and examined it. It was unmistakably the same book he had once handed to Ginny Weasley. Maybe, just maybe, Ted hadn't told Dumbledore all he knew. Perhaps there was still a way to influence the outcome. Then Ted's voice hit him like a blow. "Do you know what almost happened because of this?" The diary slipped from Lucius's fingers and thudded to the floor again. "This diary contains the memories, emotions, and magic of a young wizard named Tom Marvolo Riddle," Ted said quietly. "It has dangerous, corrupting enchantments bound to it. He used Draco's name to open the Chamber of Secrets, and he tried to use Draco's life to bring himself back." He lifted his wand. Letters of light appeared in the air, first spelling out Tom's name, then rearranging into the chilling declaration, "I am Lord Voldemort." Ted paused for a moment, giving the already trembling Lucius a little time to breathe and regain composure. "Mr. Malfoy, I don't know what kind of magic can revive a spirit that barely clings to life, but I do know it would be extremely valuable." "I can't prove who handled that diary before," Lucius whispered, "but Lord Voldemort certainly knows." The name made Lucius flinch. He imagined all the terrible consequences at once. "He isn't completely dead, at least not last time I saw him. I saw what he looked like without a nose. He's not gone for good. He'll come back if he can. If he finds the very thing he relied on for rebirth thrown away and destroyed, what do you think he'll do?" Lucius's pupils trembled. Sweat gleamed on his brow in the firelight. No one knew Voldemort's punishments better than he did. He had seen them too many times. Sometimes people were better off dead. "And he almost killed Draco," Ted added, and that struck the father harder than any threat to himself. A man fears for his own life, but when his family is threatened, he becomes desperate. "We don't want him to return," Ted said. "And if he does, we must stop him, kill him completely. No one wants to live through that again, not even purebloods." "Think about it," Lucius croaked. "Last time he talked about making purebloods great again. What happened? Families were ruined, ancient lines broken. Pureblood talk is just an excuse to consolidate power. You should have seen through it." Ted's expression didn't change. "I'm not threatening you, Mr. Malfoy. I'm just laying out the situation. On this point, dealing with Voldemort, we're aligned. Aside from the Loyalists in Azkaban, nobody wants him back to wreck the wizarding world. Even if you don't join us, we will fight him. But we won't force you. Voldemort will. In his eyes, Death Eaters are tools, useful until they aren't. He'd discard them. Draco might not escape being a tool." Lucius's composure cracked. He did not want his only son to be bound to an erratic, cruel tyrant. He had escaped the Ministry's judgment once and had believed the nightmare had ended. Now the instrument of that nightmare, his master's way to return, had been destroyed by his own hand. What would Voldemort do? He might not strike with a single killing curse, but he would set impossible tasks, torment, humiliate, and prolong suffering, perhaps even slaughter the family to make an example. The thought turned Lucius's fear into a hard, decisive resolve. He spoke in a low, fierce voice. "Horcrux. That damned diary. It's one of his Horcruxes." "Horcrux?" Ted feigned mild ignorance, gauging him. Lucius, pushed to the edge, went further. "I think you know who. Tom Riddle must have more than one Horcrux. No, he definitely does. He's terrified of death to the extreme." He muttered of, "Never heard of multiple Horcruxes," called him a madman. The panic and shame had driven him nearly mad. Naming the terror out loud was the only relief. "Calm down, Mr. Malfoy. I understand your fear. Voldemort's terror needs no rehearsal, but fear doesn't solve anything. Pull yourself together." "We haven't said we want anything from you," Ted went on. Lucius looked up, desperate. "Then what do you want?" "Do nothing. Stay Lucius Malfoy. If he never revives, that's the best outcome. Today will be as if it never happened. But if he revives, you could easily find yourself back in his service." Lucius blurted. He never trusts anyone, not even me. You're right. I'm not asking you to be an undercover agent or to pass messages. I don't need you to fight Voldemort. I only need you to understand that from the moment you threw that diary away, Voldemort became your enemy. If things escalate to the point where a choice is unavoidable, you'll make it then. Today is about communicating and reaching a mutual understanding. Now please, take Draco to the hospital. He needs rest. Oh, and an impertinent request. Could you transfer this house elf to me? Lucius's eyes darted to Dobby, lying pale and still on the floor. He heard our conversation. Don't worry, Ted said. I'll handle it. Lucius, naturally, thought first of safety. Ted, however, had other plans. Dobby still had his own mission, and Ted would see it through in his own way. In the ward, Arthur and Molly Weasley were saying farewell to Dumbledore. Ron's condition had improved. He was thin and shaken, but no longer in grave danger. They were about to leave. Dumbledore, his pupils dilated, came fully awake and nodded, a little embarrassed. Rest assured, Ron will be safe at school. He trailed off, guilt flickering across his face. The injury had happened on school grounds. Then his thoughts spun. The Chamber of Secrets, the diary, Horcruxes, Lucius, Voldemort, Neville, and Ted. He had, in secret, listened. He had used magic to hear and watch Ted and Lucius's conversation. The weight of what he had heard pressed on him. Tom Riddle's backup plan was Horcruxes, and not just one, and Ted. If Voldemort had Neville or the boy who lived, on whom to wreak his vengeance, what did he intend to do about Ted, this brilliant young wizard whose talents were becoming impossible to ignore? Ted had let Dumbledore overhear deliberately. After a shift in attitude, Ted had decided to stop the games with the old headmaster and to be blunt and direct. Ted returned to the ward after everyone else had left and lay down on the bed, finally able to breathe. Ron peeked his head out. Ted? I'm sorry about earlier. It's all right, Voldemort's cunning could fool anyone. Besides, you've already made it right. Ron touched his backside reflexively and felt with a birth of relief that it had regrown. He blurted in a rush. Slytherin ate my butt. I hate him. But I paid the price, right? I paid for my mistake with my butt, didn't I? Ted nodded. Right. All even. No one is allowed to mention that Senior Tom couldn't teach you anything anymore. Ron blinked, then brightened at the next thought. My wand sacrificed itself for the school. I should apply for compensation from Dumbledore. You should, Ted agreed. I strongly recommend it. Ron's grin was sudden and uncontainable. Don't worry, I'll get it. The headmaster will. Right, Dumbledore? Ron added, looking toward the headmaster as if for confirmation. 187. Statistical harvest. Diary explosion. When something like this happened, Dumbledore would be genuinely alarmed. Last year, the actions of the good student Tom had still felt controllable. Dumbledore wrote the script and let the actors, Tom and Quirrell, improvise. This year felt like an unbridled wild donkey. In the underground chamber last year, Dumbledore had watched Lord Voldemort's remnant soul howl and pass through a wall, and he had not tried to intercept it. He had sensed then that Voldemort's condition was special. He had no confidence, indeed, no magic, that could affect the Dark Lord in that state. His rule had always been, either don't act or act to kill. From dueling and defeating his old friend at the peak of power, disbanding the 10,000 Saints, to letting Lord Voldemort stir trouble in the British magical world without engaging him directly, Dumbledore had stuck by that creed. What he hadn't expected was that while he was working day and night to figure out what exactly had happened to the good student and why he'd become unkillable, his own base would be stolen. This year's Chamber of Secrets incident had caught Dumbledore off guard. Lucius Malfoy had seized the moment to pressure other school governors into signing for an immediate expulsion, and Dumbledore suddenly found himself on the defensive. Even after Fawkes returned and the whole story came out, he hurried back to the school to take charge. In that situation, Ted, who had actually killed the basilisk and destroyed the diary, was the core of the incident. How could Dumbledore possibly ignore him? Ted had even chatted with Lucius out in the open, as if on purpose, drawing Dumbledore in to eavesdrop. He dominated the conversation from start to finish, showing no fear when speaking to Lucius or when mentioning Lord Voldemort. He sounded like a principal. At that moment, nobody remembered he was only a second year. His manner seemed even bolder than Tom's had been. Dumbledore had once believed this student needed careful guidance to keep him from going astray. Now he worried he might be cultivating another Dark Lord in his declining years. It was natural, then, that he'd secretly listened to the conversation in the school hospital. Ted's remark about compensating for the wand was intended for Dumbledore's ears, and Ted, in that short night, changed his outlook. He decided to face the magical world with less restraint. Lying on the hospital bed, listening to Ron's faint snores, Ted stared at the ceiling with narrowed eyes. If you won't let me be free, fine, then I'll be harder to control. If I'm too obedient, you'll keep me on a leash. But if I'm a problem child, you'll be forced to accommodate me. He had a sudden clarity. Live out TZ's value. The squeaky wheel gets the grease. No more cowardice. No more hiding. Let them try to send me to Azkaban. What can they do? At worst, they'll guide me to fight Voldemort. That was exactly what he wanted. First things first, tally the gains from the incident. The past night had been packed with events. Going to Hagrid's hut, Hagrid's arrest, Dumbledore threatened with expulsion, burning the giant spiders in the Forbidden Forest, Ron's confession, Lockhart forced into the chamber to save Malfoy, and finally killing the basilisk and destroying the diary. That one night had felt like a week. Experience-wise, burning the spiders had yielded a full 12,960 experience points, but that had already been spent on leveling and upgrading magic right before the big battle. At the moment, the experience pool showed 11,514 points, 154 left over from before, 350 from the quest, Baby Like Sleep Blue, the reward for Lockhart getting himself cleared, 2,160 for destroying the diary, and 8,850 for killing the basilisk. The basilisk's entry, Millennium Basilisk, level 14 magical creature, 2 modified creature, 1 millennium creature, had a huge 8,850 point reward. Ted suspected that number had been reduced, since Ron's wand explosion had done significant damage to the basilisk and surely affected the final experience split. Besides experience, there were card drops. First, the 8 white and green cards that burst from the acromantula. Large piece of spider meat, material card X2, large pieces of white, springy, translucent meat. Acromantula silk sack green, material card X2, something like a white spider silk extending from a sack. Acromantula venom, material card, a bottle of green liquid. Acromantula eye, material card, a strange glowing eyeball. Material card, a spider-shaped black shadow lurking in the canopy. Spider walking shoes. Item card, a pair of light blue knitted mesh shoes. Most of these are raw materials. Lurking Instinct is a material card used to strengthen or add special effects to other cards. Spider walking shoes is equipment. Equipping it grants +1 agility and allows you to walk on walls and ceilings. Note, wall walking requires a strong core and reasonable body weight. The shoes themselves are an exquisite, fashionable knitted mesh pair, practical and stylish. From the quest Baby Like Sleep Blue came Memory Charm Blue, a one-time use card that upgrades Memory Charm directly to level 5 when used. Professor Lockhart wasn't stingy, nor was Professor Quirrell before him. Both Defense Against the Dark Arts instructors had, in their own way, sacrificed themselves to help Ted. He felt nothing but gratitude. Then came the drops from the Horcrux Diary and the Basilisk Remnants. Life Parasitism spell card. Select a target and parasite a portion of their magical power, slowly extracting life force to strengthen yourself. Uses 1/1. Note, the parasitism process is complex. You must pierce the opponent's mental defenses and magical resistance. Ghostification spell card. Used to transform a dying target into a ghost under your control. Uses 1/1. Note, use with caution. If the target is too powerful, the ghost might turn against you. Magic Essence, material card, condensed powerful pure magic energy, rare with many potential uses. Experience card, grants 1000 EXP upon use. Uses 1/1. The diary had lived up to its name as a one-time Horcrux. Its drops were single-use and dangerous. Those 2 spell cards were insidious, practically Dark Lord grade. They couldn't be used casually. If anyone discovered them in his possession, they would be a direct route to a 3rd Dark Lord's throne. Adjuncts would probably be useful for strengthening other cards later. Experience card, blue, was straightforwardly practical. another source of experience. Then came the cards dropped by the Basilisk. 188, Basilisk Explosion. The first card the Basilisk dropped had a red border. The picture showed a broken fang about the length of a forearm, a faint purple venom beating at the tip. Millennium Basilisk Fang. Material card, a broken fang from a Millennium Basilisk. Its venom is lethal to most magical items and living things. Note, do not injure yourself. There is no cure. A blue-bordered card showed an orange-yellow vertical pupil set in a silver ring. Staring at it seemed to induce a dizzy trance. Eye of Dizziness, item card, +1 perception. Equipping this increases sensitivity to gazes and sharpens vision. Dazzle, consumes a small amount of magic to daze targets who meet your gaze. Note, wearing an eyeball ring draws attention. Spell card. After use, your skin transforms into basilisk hide, becoming tough and injury-resistant and granting +2 levels of magic resistance. Lasts 5 minutes, cooldown 5 hours. Note, being covered in scales does not exactly make you look virtuous. Another blue-bordered card hinted at some towering, ever-growing humanoid. Infinite Growth. Material card, a long lifespan that brings continuous, immense growth. Then a red-bordered card with a bold +3000 EXP stamped across it. Experience card. Experience card, used to gain 3000 experience points. Uses 1/1. Too bad, of the 2 red cards, one was an experience card and the other a basilisk fang. Ted wasn't sure what to do with a fang right now. The ring was equipable and attractive, and the spell Basilisk Skin, blue, would be unbelievably useful in a pinch, letting him shrug off enemy magic. As for looking like a scaled villain, he couldn't worry about appearances, and the red experience card was 3000 points. Killing that one basilisk had already given him a huge haul, over 11,000 experience when you added everything up, though it still wasn't as efficient as burning gnomes. Where could he find more monsters to grind? Crunching the numbers, his experience pool now read 11,514 plus 1,000 plus 3,000 equal 15,514. 1,000 scattered gold pieces, yet they found their way back. Oh, and on the return trip he'd collected a big roll of basilisk skin. He wasn't sure how much of the creature he'd salvage, but the skin was worth keeping. And there was more. A Halloween quest he'd accepted, Chamber of Secrets, read. Killing the basilisk completed that quest, adding another 1,500 experience, bringing his total to 17,014. He also triggered a card draw. System, draw reward cards for the quest. Ted murmured. 3 cards appeared in his head, and all 3 flipped up red. The first showed the basilisk's head, its twin orange-yellow eyes blazing. Basilisk Gaze spell card. Causes fatal damage to targets that look directly at you with a very high chance of instant death. Uses 1/1. Note, survival depends on the target's magic level, magic resistance, vitality, and how many targets are looking directly at you at once. That was the basilisk's signature ability, but it was single use. It seemed to affect everyone looking at him simultaneously, though the more people there were, the less likely anyone was to die instantly. The second card showed someone in a tight red and blue suit. Spider-Man. Item card. Equipping grants powerful abilities. Poison resistance. Great resistance to various poisons. You are unlikely to be poisoned. Reflexes, +6 agility. Mutated physique, +4 constitution, +4 strength. Spider sense, a powerful 6th sense, 2 prophecy. Wall crawling, defy gravity and walk on walls and ceilings. Web slinging, fire sticky, durable webs from your wrists or weave them into nets. Note, this equipment occupies many slots: clothing, pants, shoes, wrists, gloves, helmet, etc. Holy cow, a spider suit? If it was real, the stats were incredible. He'd be a mini superhero. The snag was that it wasn't very magical and would hog a lot of equipment slots. Was he supposed to wear a skin-tight suit and play vigilante in Diagon Alley? The third card showed a short, yellow lightning bolt striking the head of a 2-headed wolf. Retribution, spell card. Deals massive true damage to non-human targets and restores a portion of your health, stamina, and magic. Cooldown, 24 hours. Which to pick? Ted thought it over, and then decided. It's you, he muttered to the chosen card. The next day, Madame Pomfrey bustled into the infirmary carrying several vials of purple potion, smiling. Children, good news. The full recovery potion is finally ready. We owe Professor Sprout for tending the mandrakes and Professor Snape for brewing the potion. You'll all be right as rain soon. The potion was meant for those petrified. Although it could heal Ron's lingering aches, he'd mostly recovered after a night's sleep. The potion was precious and had to go to the more severely affected students. Ron insisted, "You lot drink it. I won't bother you." But when the tiny glass test tube was brought and a drop of the purple potion touched lips that had been gray and stone-like, color visibly returned. By the time the last victim had been treated, the first small girl, Clara, was already almost fully recovered, blinking and shaking her head as if waking from a deep sleep. All 5 victims recovered. Madame Pomfrey, cautious as ever, still kept them in the hospital wing for another day, and kept Ron there too. His backside was still bruised. He needed white essence again that afternoon. "Save me, Ted. I don't want Madame Pomfrey putting medicine on my bottom anymore," Ron begged. How could Ted get him out of it? If Ron tried to defy the school nurse in the hospital wing, he could be held down for treatment. He had to stay and endure the humiliation. But when friends came to visit that afternoon, they found Ron happily chatting with a girl. "Lavender, are you all right?" Harry called, hurrying over. The girl animatedly talking with Ron was Lavender, Ron's admirer and one of the Chamber of Secrets victims. Hermione darted across to check on Clara. Clara jabbered about how lucky she'd been to wear her gnome goggles. Without them, she said, she would have died. She went on and on about how amazing gnome goggles were and how gnome magic was the best in the world. Ron, predictably, argued back. "Ted's goggles are the best. Yeah, they can block a basilisk's gaze." "Ted, don't brag about me." Before his friends arrived, Ron had spent most of the morning boasting to Lavender about his role in the whole affair. He was the heroic second lead, provoking an old senior, casting a shrinking boulder spell, having a wand blast the basilisk, an action hero script. Was he bragging? Maybe. But Lavender was completely smitten, her eyes full of admiration. Part of why Ron came off so well was due to help from someone else. Penelope Clearwater, Ravenclaw head girl and another chamber victim. Penelope had been quietly supporting Ron because she was close friends with his sister Peggy, like sworn sisters. When your best friend's little brother is trying to woo someone, you lend a helping hand. Anyone who's played League of Legends knows what an ADC can do with excellent support, while the opponent was a naive top laner. It was a decisive victory. Ron and Lavender, one smooth-talking, the other starry-eyed, were blissfully happy. Jerry watched Ron's eloquence and Lavender's adoring face and suddenly felt a strange twinge. "Jerry, where did that sour, jealous smell come from?" Thanks to readers, Worried City, and a small dish 2004 for 100 points of reward. Thank you. 189. Gala dinner. It took a few days for things to calm down. With the newspapers and 1,000 unofficial rumors doing their work, word spread that the Chamber of Secrets had been cleared, the 1,000-year-old basilisk killed, and the crisis averted. Students who had fled returned to school. It was the end of May. There were still 2 weeks until the holidays, and final exams to worry about. This year, in the second half especially, everything had escalated so much that no one had had much headspace for studying. Even the professors were exhausted and distracted. Professor Lockhart had been sent to St. Mungo's earlier than even Malfoy. He was in the children's ward, surrounded by 2- and 3-year-olds. The doctors admitted they didn't really know what to do for him. His memory charm had backfired so badly he had wiped out nearly all of his memories and much of his personality. Victims of overly powerful memory charms often suffered long, severe amnesia, sometimes for years, but Lockhart was an extreme and baffling case. Mungo's had called in specialists from abroad for consultations, and the conclusion was grim. It looked as though Lockhart might have to start a whole new life. Some people with kinder hearts said at least that Lockhart had been given a new life. If the professors were shaken, the students weren't doing much better. Grades were dreadful. Homework was barely done. Snape, temporarily in charge of defense against the dark arts, was in no mood for leniency. He set brutal assignments, perhaps to teach the so-called heroes who had ventured into the chamber a lesson. He didn't spare even Harry. "If I don't make you understand how serious this is," Snape said in his clipped voice, Will you be challenging a dragon next? Everyone had the impression he was trying to scare them straight. For the past 2 days, the homework and notes of Ted and Hermione had become hot items. Everyone wanted to copy them. On the last day of May, the school decided to hold a celebratory banquet to mark that Hogwarts, that venerable thousand-year school, had survived this catastrophe. They would also mark that its students had solved the monster in the Chamber of Secrets, at the expense of the Defense Against the Dark Arts professor, which, given that post's history, seemed almost inevitable. Students who had bet at the start of the year that Lockhart would last a year now had to take their losses out of pocket. The feast began at dusk. The house elf chefs were no longer content to stay in the kitchens. They set up a live cooking display at one end of the great hall. Woks flashed, grills glowed, and a riot of scents filled the air. Stir-frying, braising, deep-frying, stewing, everything from looking up at the stars, pies to foie gras and caviar, African giant snails and Australian lobsters. The head chefs had let loose decades of culinary experimentations, and the results were dazzling. Especially popular were the medicinal meals the kitchen had developed with Ted, dishes that combined magical plants and potion-infused recipes. They tasted incredible and produced minor magical effects, nourishing or restoring strength, stabilizing the spirit, temporarily enhancing spellcasting, resisting certain abnormal conditions, even a dish that let you breathe fire for a short while. Professor Sprout had approved them, and even Snape, though he grumbled at the silliness, put his name to the tests at McGonagall's insistence. Besides, who could argue with the salmon-seafood medley from the kitchens? The great hall buzzed with noise and laughter. Sparks leapt occasionally from a pot and drew a chorus of delighted exclamations. The dark clouds that had hovered over Hogwarts for weeks seemed to have lifted. Faces showed relief and joy. Even Snape looked marginally less severe. At one point, a first-year approached Ted and asked him to sing to liven things up. The hall cheered, and Ted didn't refuse. "All right," he said. "One song, then anyone who wants to perform can come up. If you want, bring friends, if you can accompany them." He waved a hand and a chair transformed into a small wooden stage beneath his feet, done so smoothly that a few older students felt a prickle of envy. They could sense that Ted's spellwork had become almost effortless. He pulled a fist-sized music box-looking gadget from his pocket, snapped his fingers, and a melody filled the air. "A song. New soul for everyone," he announced, and sang, "I'm a new soul. I came to this strange world, hoping to learn how to give and receive. Since I came here, I've experienced joy and fear. La 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 la." The light, cheerful tune drifted through the hall. Students hummed along, content and relaxed. Professor Flitwick, never one to hide his pride, stood on a chair and waved his wand as if conducting. Professor McGonagall smiled and tapped her fingers to the rhythm. Snape turned his head away but listened anyway, reminding himself not to be moved. Dumbledore pushed his spectacles up and watched Ted as if seeing something familiar. He found himself thinking of old pictures, Grindelwald drawing followers in his day in much the same way, then Tom Riddle later. Ted's presence revived a string of memories Dumbledore hadn't intended to revisit. Perhaps he ought to speak plainly with the boy, he thought. He had no room for mistakes now. Ted finished to thunderous applause. "Anyone who wants to show off, come on up," he called. "This thing will accompany you if you know how to feed it magic." He demonstrated the small device, an invention of alchemy and spellcraft, and hopped down. The portable karaoke he had built at odd hours was an instant hit. People could sing a few lines without needing an instrument. The gadget provided accompaniment. Students clustered around, asking how much it cost. Ted shrugged. "I'll give the manufacturing method to Fred and George. If you want one, you can buy it from them." The Weasley twins practically hugged him. "Ted, you're our true brother," they shouted. Ron, not quite so lucky, shoved forward. "What about me?" he demanded. "Don't I get a cut?" The twins laughed. They'd already staked their claim. Ron, eyes hopeful, said, "Ted, you think I still have a chance? I want to make money too." Ted looked at him over his shoulder. "Do you know how to brew a polymorph potion? Type 3? Ron blinked. "No, what's that?" "Do you know how to harden brass with basic alchemy?" No." "Do you know a perception spell or ancient runes for magic storage?" Ron shook his head at each question. Ancient runes wasn't taught until later. He honestly didn't know any of it. Ted patted him on the shoulder. Keep working, Ron. You'll get there. Ron tried to look reassured. He still planned to eat his way through the feast if necessary. Fine, he muttered. I'll just show off by eating a whole chicken in 2 bites. Around him, the hall dissolved into laughter and music, the evening stretching out warm and bright. One more unexpected tradition added to Hogwarts' long history. 190. Ji Ching and Treasure. The little wizards sat together, eating pre-dinner desserts and fruit, watching the house elves show off their various skills and chatting about light, pleasant things. Everyone felt utterly content. Somehow the conversation turned to Penelope, Ravenclaw's head girl, who had been petrified. They wondered why she'd been found in the basement before the Quidditch match. Penelope only smiled and said nothing. Peggy, however, answered bluntly, I was supposed to meet her there. We arranged to meet. The quick-witted ones, Harry, Hermione, and Ted, picked up on the implication at once. They exchanged quiet, slightly stunned glances. What on earth were those two doing meeting in the basement? Then they saw Penelope, face a little flushed, take Peggy's arm. Hermione's big eyes widened. She blinked rapidly as if she'd misseen it. It wasn't just her. The students nearby fell silent for a moment. Ron, still chewing a chicken leg, glanced up in confusion. He'd been looking over at Lavender at the next table and had missed whatever was happening here. Jerry leaned over and whispered, Your sister's in love with Penelope. Ron couldn't swallow around his mouthful. Penelope? I considered you a friend, and you want to steal my sister? The news was explosive, but then, this was Britain. Stranger gossip had certainly circulated before. Ted, ever a man of principle, didn't want his friends left with misunderstandings. He steered the conversation away and quietly briefed them on Tom's involvement in the Chamber of Secrets, explaining how he had found the entrance in the girls' lavatory. He didn't say the name Voldemort. The others didn't know who he meant. Their conclusion, that Senior Tom was a pervert who liked sneaking into girls' restrooms. Neville and Harry covered their mouths, laughing outright. Both of them had a very personal grudge against Voldemort, and Ted's casual telling had the effect of deflating some of the fear that name inspired. After 2 public failures, last year and this year, Voldemort had lost a lot of the menace he once held. Last year, when the others learned they might have to face him, they'd been terrified. Now they were making jokes about his nose. Ted's rambling aside even had them speculating wildly. Tom's first death had been in 1981, while Voyager 2 had launched in 1977. If Tom could have tucked a Horcrux aboard Voyager, it might now be beyond the solar system. The room erupted with absurd hypothetical jokes. If only Voldemort had known more science, they teased, there could have been a Harry Potter and Star Trek crossover. Voyager, Axio. Or maybe it would have been Tom Riddle and the Sith Lord, dark magic versus the dark side. Or Voldemort confronting Trisolarans. What is this thing? Get it away! The ceiling stars twinkled as house elves brought a final round of delicacies and the banquet began in earnest. Dumbledore tapped his goblet and stood to speak. This year has been a difficult one. Our students, under the leadership of the school, have overcome the basilisk in the Chamber of Secrets. It proves that some dark creatures are merely paper tigers. He cleared his throat and was more direct. The creature in the chamber captured Draco Malfoy, and it was Neville Longbottom, Ted Epiphany, Harry Potter, Ron Weasley, Hermione Granger, and Jerry, together with our unfortunately injured Professor Lockhart, who rescued him. In truth, Ted had already gathered evidence that Professor Lockhart's memoirs were stolen from other people's stories and had sent it to the papers, but Dumbledore didn't mention that. After all, he had hired Lockhart and couldn't very well discredit his own judgment in public. Now the monster has been vanquished, Dumbledore continued. The unsettling chaos is behind us. To honor the contributions of the 6 students just named, the school has awarded them a special contribution award. Thunderous applause filled the Great Hall. This year the students had been tormented by the Chamber of Secrets. Now they could celebrate. Peggy squealed, "Oh my! Ron, you've received the greatest honor in our family, the Special Contribution Award," and rubbed his head. Ron rubbed his bum and grinned. "I earned it. I practically traded my backside for it." Dumbledore added, Each of them will also receive 100 points for their house. The Gryffindors practically erupted. Neville and the others' points pushed the house so far ahead that Ravenclaw's earlier advantage meant nothing. Gryffindor locked in the house cup. The little lions beat their chests and cheered until Professor McGonagall glared, and the Weasley twins were forced into silence. Then Dumbledore's next words set off another roar. Given the many events this year, the school has decided to cancel the final exams. The hall nearly lifted off its hinges. Students whooped as if it were Christmas. Everyone was ecstatic, except Hermione. Why? Why cancel the exams? I studied for 3 months, she wailed, disappointed. Ron and Jerry shot happy looks at her. Let you compete, they thought smugly. Without exams, Hermione couldn't prove herself. The banquet stretched on toward the wee hours. Around 11 o'clock, the great oak doors opened and a huge figure filled the doorway. Hagrid. He had been released from Azkaban. It had taken days. Fudge had kept the matter quiet, but here he was. Hagrid! Neville and the others jumped up and ran to him. Hagrid bent and hugged the children, who barely reached his waist, and in a low voice like distant thunder said, "Thank ye, Ted. If it weren't for your bracelet, I'd have been done for. I don't know how I'd have survived that dreadful place without it." He was referring to the bracelet Ted had given him. Its password opened a small pocket dimension inside. Ted had filled it with kitchen-made chocolate chip cookies laced with a happiness potion. The worst thing about Azkaban, Hagrid said, was the Dementors. Their sucking away of hope left prisoners numb and purposeless. Something sweet, and especially a targeted potion that returned a sense of happiness, could stave off the worst of it. The festivities wound down, and as the little wizards grew sleepy, they left together. Just as they were heading out, Neville remembered something. "Oh, yesterday I returned Gryffindor's sword to the headmaster's office, and the sorting hat quietly told me I'm eligible to try for Gryffindor's treasure." At the word treasure, Ron's eyes lit up, and Jerry's ears perked. Neville added, a little oddly, "But the sorting hat said the clue is only one sentence. Gryffindor's secret is hidden behind Slytherin." "What does that mean?" Harry asked. Neville shrugged, about to answer, when Dumbledore, who had been nearby, approached and said, "Ted, could you come to my office for a moment? I'd like a word with you." "Of course," Ted replied with a smile. "Come to my office." He said goodbye to his companions and followed Dumbledore up to the 8th floor office. 191. Principal Talk. The stone gargoyle over the headmaster's office clearly knew how to recognize people. It didn't ask for a password when Dumbledore arrived. It simply stepped aside. Ted followed him up the spiral staircase to the top of the main tower. The headmaster's office was circular. A smaller staircase climbed higher to the headmaster's bedroom. The walls were crowded with portraits of former headmasters, most of them snoring, their picture frames bulging with ridiculous snot bubbles. A few, however, lifted their eyelids and peered down, the sort who had been vigilant in life. Ted wondered, briefly and idly, whether portraits really needed to sleep or if they were only mimicking habits from their painters' lives. Either way, portraits were not to be underestimated. Hung on the wall or not, they had become part of the castle, messengers, observers, and advisors who could travel between all copies of their likeness. 2 portraits of the same person could compare notes. Their frames were the eyes and ears of the wizarding world, linked to places like St. Mungo's, the Ministry, and the old pure-blood mansions. Phineas Nigellus, for instance, headmaster a century ago and a black family relative, had a portrait in the cramped black house. While the house itself was heavily guarded, Phineas's portrait could come and go, monitor, and pass on news. This wall held dozens like him. On the left, curved bookshelves bristled with thick volumes. Ted's eyes snagged on a familiar spine, Secrets of the Darkest Arts, the one that discussed Horcruxes. Dumbledore had already brought it here. Efficient, indeed. As a mind mage, Ted controlled his face perfectly. He'd noticed the forbidden book, but he made no show of it and sat at the headmaster's desk as if the shelves were nothing. The desk was large and crescent-shaped, balanced on 6 slender legs that finished in carved claws. He half expected it to climb away. It was littered with odd silver instruments that hummed faintly with magic. On a cabinet to the right sat the sorting hat, which could hardly contain its delight. "Hello, Ted. Good evening," it called. "Good evening, hat." Ted replied, and made a small, hat-doffing gesture. The Sorting Hat laughed loud enough to wake a few of the portraits. Dumbledore settled into his chair. Fawkes, the Phoenix, lay on a bronze stand on the desk, eyes half closed as if pretending to sleep. "Would you like a treat?" Dumbledore pushed a large plate toward Ted. Dark, glossy things crawled and skittered across it. "Cockroach clusters, a new Honeyduke specialty. Fascinating!" Ted smiled and popped two into his mouth. They crackled and squirmed, then yielded syrupy sweetness. The taste was good, the texture was peculiar. "I'm rather fond of interesting things," Ted said, smiling. "But I don't eat many sweets, they're bad for the teeth." Offering food was one of Dumbledore's little habits. He did it not only as courtesy, but because a sudden stimulus could make the mind shift, and for a master of legilimency, any provoked fluctuation in a guest's thoughts made subsequent conversation easier. That was why Snape never ate or drank in the headmaster's office. He kept himself guarded. Snape trusted Dumbledore enough to work with him, but he trusted him far less personally. He had a grudge. He thought Dumbledore should have acted to save Lily Evans, and blamed him for failing to do so. Snape's bitterness ran deep, a sense that the man he had betrayed Voldemort to help had not done all he could. It was a resentment that wouldn't be assuaged by explanations about leadership or difficult choices. All Snape saw was Lily's death. Ted's calm was complete. He showed nothing. Dumbledore's expression remained patient and kindly. "Sit, Ted. Don't be nervous. I want to hear what happened in the Chamber of Secrets," he said. "If you don't mind, shall I start from the beginning?" Ted answered. "Please." He began at the start, Arthur Weasley and Lucius Malfoy in the shop, the odd contest in Diagon Alley, the Iron Fist tournament, and then everything that led up to the Chamber of Secrets. He told it all carefully, holding nothing back. At the end he said simply, "So I pierced Tom's diary with the Gryffindor sword." From his sleeve he produced the diary, its cover rent and a hole clean through the middle, and set it on the table. Dumbledore's face changed. He drew a small magnifying lens from a drawer and peered closely, as if it were a curious specimen. The book had once looked ordinary, but long contact with concentrated dark magic had turned it into something dangerous and advanced. Even destroyed as it now was, it thrummed with residual dark power. A sensitive witch or wizard would feel a chill standing near it. Intact, the diary's malice had been inward and secret, but shattered, the chaos leaked out. When Dumbledore opened it and read the name, Tom Marvolo Riddle, a far-off look passed over him. "Extremely dangerous," he said, leaning back and repeating the words as if to anchor them. "Ted, you were excellent. Very few adult wizards would have done better." Ted felt both relieved and uneasy at the praise. "You flatter me. We did what we could. The sword did the work. I only thought about saving Malfoy at the time and acted. If it hadn't been for Fawkes and Ron, we were careless." He had been afraid his actions might make Dumbledore think of Tom Riddle and see a likeness where none should be. If Dumbledore concluded Ted was a threat, he could have been restricted or worse. The Philosopher's Stone business from the previous year had already put Ted on the headmaster's radar. By the start of their second year, Dumbledore was watching the group more deliberately. Had the Chamber of Secrets incident not occurred, Dumbledore might have written a careful set of trials, tests to reveal character and guide them toward the right path. Instead, the whole affair left Dumbledore shaken, and Lucius Malfoy seized the moment to strike at the school's vulnerabilities. That political pressure even forced Dumbledore to step back from his duties for a time. Dumbledore had been wary of Ted's talent from the moment he arrived. It made sense. Exceptional ability, astonishing charisma, a born legilimens, terrifyingly diligent, all of it felt uncomfortably familiar to the headmaster. Why had Dumbledore been so suspicious of Tom Riddle during his school days? Tom had been adored by everyone, students, teachers, even the ghosts. Only Dumbledore had never been able to stand him. After the Chamber of Secrets, Tom never dared to open it again. Dumbledore's mistrust wasn't simply because he knew what Tom had done in the orphanage. It was because, in his youth, Dumbledore had been deceived by a young, handsome scoundrel radiating a dark charisma. He'd learned the hard way what that kind of personality could do. Tom Riddle had wanted to remake the world in Grindelwald's image. Dumbledore had developed an immunity to that style. So when a new student arrived with the same exceptional gifts and the same sweeping popularity, Dumbledore's old caution flared up again. Lord Voldemort had been very good at persuading people. Ted was the same, perhaps even better. Everyone at Hogwarts adored Ted, students and most professors alike, everyone except Snape. And Ted's talent for inciting and swaying crowds reminded Dumbledore of the very persuasion he had seen in the past, the same mesmerizing rhetoric that had once led so many astray. Given all that, Ted decided it was better to be frank. After the Chamber of Secrets incident, he had changed his approach. He could no longer pretend to be an ordinary student. Sincerity would serve him better than deception. "Headmaster," Ted asked during their meeting, "are you watching me because of Tom Riddle? Were you that wary of him back then?" "You are different," Dumbledore answered immediately, then lowered his head, a trace of sadness in his face. "But I'm sorry. After Tom, I became overly sensitive in this matter. I must apologize." Dumbledore knew lying now would be the worst choice. Ted shouldn't be treated like a child, to be treated as an equal. Often, honesty did more good than finesse. Ted spread his hands helplessly. "I can understand your caution after what happened with Tom. In many ways there are similarities, but I'm not like him. I don't have his defects of character. I'm not terrified of death. I can't understand how he could have been so afraid of growing old when he was only a teenager." Dumbledore relaxed, dropping some of his mental defenses, and spoke like an elder to a mischievous but promising youth. "I must admit my methods back then were not always wise," he said. "Tom was notorious. As for his fear of death, I never understood it either. He wanted to fly over death itself. Arrogant, really. Tom Riddle, of course, had taken that fear to an extreme. By 16, he had created a Horcrux, and then continued to split his soul, driving himself further toward madness. Ted had no desire to follow such a path. Ted then pointed at the diary on the table, a book with a jagged hole in its binding. "What do you make of this? Something that seems to have its own thoughts, can absorb others' emotions and life to manifest physically." Under his drooping eyelids, Dumbledore studied the book, eyes suddenly grave. "A very evil dark artifact, of a very high order. I have rarely heard of anything quite like this." Dumbledore's reaction confirmed what others suspected. The diary was very likely a Horcrux. The headmaster had been searching for clues. The volume Secrets of the Most Potent Dark Arts sat on his office shelf, but he felt it was still wrong to discuss such things in depth with a student. He believed talented children should not be exposed to the dark arts too early. It warped values and opened dangerous doors. Ted had already read the forbidden book, but he understood Dumbledore's caution. If he hadn't been a mature adult in spirit, armed with a great deal of otherworld knowledge, he might have been enticed by the power and mystery of the dark arts too. Curiosity only deepens into darkness. Ted had always been cautious in his research, conservative, self-monitoring. He conducted psychological assessments on himself every month to catch any changes he might miss. After he had pressed the headmaster to take the diary seriously, Ted let the rest be. Next year, he would only be a third year. There were boundaries to what he should know and when. Still, he pictured how the story might read in the papers. At the invitation of Headmaster Dumbledore, Outstanding Student and Special Contribution Award recipient, Ted paid a courtesy visit to the headmaster's office in late May. The two had a comprehensive exchange about teacher-student cooperation, emotional and moral education, and reached consensus on concerns regarding the diary of the former student Tom Riddle. Both recalled the harmonious scene of the school year 2 years prior and agreed to deepen teacher-student collaboration amidst the significant developments in the wizarding world. Both emphasized a cautious approach to the dark arts and reaffirmed that Lord Voldemort's downfall was a historical inevitability. As close teacher and student partners, they expressed mutual trust and satisfaction and committed to working together to maintain the stability of the wizarding community. Headmaster Dumbledore congratulated Ted on the successful closure of the Xianyu website in Diagon Alley and wished him continued success in his enterprises. Ted pledged to cooperate with Dumbledore in safeguarding the well-being of the wizarding world. Having dispelled Dumbledore's suspicions, Ted breathed deeply. As long as he was at Hogwarts, and as long as he operated within the British wizarding community, he could not simply circumvent Dumbledore. Now that the headmaster had expressed trust and support, Ted could take bolder steps. He had once been an orphan in a Muggle home with no backing. Now he had Dumbledore's shadow behind him. He couldn't use that influence outright, but it made him less easy to push around. If Minister Fudge wanted to make trouble, he would have to think twice about Dumbledore's view. Fudge feared Dumbledore, especially the idea of him running for minister, and would risk a political earthquake if Dumbledore spoke against him. Ted also had other, quieter support, a hidden ally in Malfoy, and business ties with the Black family, the enchanted smoothing shampoo venture, of all things. Like protagonists in many novels, even those who were strong found themselves facing setbacks in an unfamiliar world, as if the author wanted to make things hard. To settle into a new place, building networks was essential. A powerful dragon could not simply stomp a local snake flat without local knowledge. Ted was still a fledgling dragon. He was only beginning to spread his wings. Chapter 193, Knowledge in June, Get a Big One. The next morning, June 1st, Children's Day, Ted opened his eyes to a pinging notification. Ding! Talent Otherworld Knowledge triggered. Discovered. Advanced Alchemist Balduran's Alchemy Notes Blue. Advanced Alchemist Balduran's Alchemy Blue recorded the alchemical insights and experiments of a Blood Elf alchemist. It required 680 experience to exchange. Wow, blue quality, Ted blurted, half excited. Ansu, curled up in his bed, lazily cracked one eye, glanced at Ted, then tucked his head back under his wing and went on sleeping. Ted hurried to wash up, slipped into the common room, found a table, sat down, and pretended to read while he exchanged the new knowledge for the 680 experience points. 680 was already more than half of the 300 needed for Taoist knowledge, so it had to be valuable. Even though Ted hadn't used much of his Taoist knowledge so far, it was unquestionably important, likely to benefit him for years to come. A flood of information poured into Ted's mind. He saw, vividly, a pale-skinned man with light golden hair and pointed ears working at a crowded laboratory bench, mixing potions, forging enchanted alloys, crafting magical items and gear. After a few minutes, Ted steadied himself enough to form an impression of Balduran. The notes mentioned a falling out with a certain prince, then a group relocating to an alien city built by blue-faced tentacled beings where they taught and sold alchemical knowledge on a platform called the Scryer's Tier. Shatrath City in Outland, Scryer's Tier, wasn't that straight out of World of Warcraft? The notes ranged all over the professions: alchemy, enchanting, jewel crafting, blacksmithing. In the game he knew, characters could only learn 2 professions. But in the real magic world, there was no such restriction. With enough talent and energy, anyone could learn multiple crafts. That explained why the title read Advanced Alchemist, not Enchanter. Balduran had simply mastered many fields. Ted skimmed through and made a quick inventory of the contents. Potion formulas included: Potion of Omnipotence, 10 to all attributes. Potion of Dreams, induces travel to the Emerald Dream. Potion of Purification, continually purifies curses, poisons, and disease for 10 minutes. Blood Elf Potion of Sagacity, +5 Intelligence, +5 Spirit. Potion of Brute Force, +4 Strength, +3 Constitution. Potion of Cat's Eye, +5 Perception, 5 Detection Skill, grants Invisibility Detection. Potion of Mongoose, +5 Agility, grants Quick Reflexes. Potion of Eagle Eye, grants Supervision. Potion of Spider Walk, walk on walls, ceilings, and water. Potion of the Seer, +3 Perception, +3 Prophecy Skill, ineffective above level 6. Potion of Arcane, 2 to Magic, and +2 to Spell Skill, ineffective above level 6. Potion of Strong Attack, physical damage enhancement, greater healing and greater mana potions, more powerful restorative potions. Potion of Fortification, applied to an item to make it more durable. Ironbark Potion, grants Ironbark defense at the cost of agility. Potion of Courage, resists most spirit and mental effects. Tonic Potion, recommended for readers with kidney problems. And the Dangerous Potion of Destruction, massive short-term enhancement with a high likelihood of death after the effect ends. There were also many low to mid-level potions, which Ted found redundant. His world already had similar effects, and his earlier otherworld knowledge, Sule Bubble Alchemy Recipe Notes Green, covered other recipes. Enchanting formulas included: enchant, greater strength, +5 strength, greater spirit, 5 spirit, greater armor, increases armor toughness, attribute enchants, +2 to a pair of attributes, powerful stamina, greater agility, +3 agility, greater constitution, +3 constitution, enchant protection, auto-triggering magic shield on an item, enchant herbology, +1 herbology skill, max level 5, enchant alchemy, +1 alchemy skill, max level 5, enchant assault, gives shoes a charge effect, enchant spell impact, enhances spells, superior mana regeneration, vitality, increases stamina and recovery, enchant magic, 1 magic skill, max level 7, haste, increases movement for boots or hand speed for gloves, elemental resistances, fire, frost, poison, shadow, +2 levels, max level 5, unholy weapon, adds shadow damage, beast slayer and demon slaying, extra damage versus beasts or evil entities, sharpened, increases armor penetration, max level 4, and winter blaze shadow power, adds elemental magic effects to weapons. It was clear Balduran favored enchanting as much as alchemy. He had mastered many powerful and rare formulas. Jewel crafting entries listed items such as Void Sphere, Jewel, +2 magic resistance up to level 7, chance to resist abnormal effects. Brilliant Mana Heart, Jewel, trinket boosting mana and spell penetration. Skyfire Diamond, Earthstorm Diamond, Rune Scarlet Ruby, Mystic Lion's Eye, Sparkling Zircon, Tidal Golden Pearl, Sunfire Pendant, Energy-infused ring, Shining Eternium ring, Siren's crown, Blood Garnet Lion ring, Energy ring, Glimmering Mithril chain, Obsidian pendant, figurines like Flame Dragonhawk, Fellsteel Crab, Shadow Gem Panther, Bronze Boar, and more. There were also craft notes for equipment, an attenuated version of an Archmage's Staff of the Tides called the Arcane Torrent Staff, a hardened adamantite holy sword favored by Blood Elf paladins, and the unique dagger formula for a blade called Elegy, along with many other weapons and tools. Alchemical products included hardened adamantite and felsteel, motes of adamantite, enchanted mithril, primal elements, earth, fire, water, air, life, shadow, mana, transmute arcanite bar, enchanted thick hide, transmute mooncloth, creation of arcane crystals, the philosopher's stone, quicksilver stone, runed fell iron rod, greater arcane staff, and so on. Everything indicated that Balduran was a master blood elf alchemist who had lived for centuries and traveled from Azeroth to Draenor, once following Prince Kel'Thas and later joining a righteous faction. His notes were encyclopedic. Ted sat in the common room for over half an hour, overwhelmed and unable to catalog it all. Hermione found him sweating a little and called down the stairs. "Ted, what are you doing here? Why didn't you go for a run today?" Startled, Ted snapped out of his reverie. He still needed to organize the material properly. Was this really all that a blue-quality knowledge pack contained? It felt too rich. "Nothing much, just thinking," he answered. Hermione came down and peered at him with concern. "Are you all right? You look like you're sweating." Ted wiped his forehead. She was right. He had been so absorbed he'd perspired. They met Harry in the Great Hall, where only he was at the table. The three of them had started breakfast when Neville and Ron stumbled in, sporting dark circles and looking like they'd been up half the night. Harry laughed. "You two look awful. Malfoy's in better shape than you lot." That reminded Hermione that Malfoy, who'd been drained by Tom for half a semester, was still recuperating at home. With less than 2 weeks until the holidays and the final exams canceled, Malfoy wouldn't be coming back for now. Hermione frowned and scolded. "Even if finals are off, you can't just waste your nights away. Did you stay up late?" Ted wondered silently if they'd gone off on a Forbidden Forest night jaunt behind his back. Ron snapped, "It's Neville's fault." Neville protested, looking aggrieved. "I told you I didn't know. You dragged me along to talk about some treasure." Woo. He hadn't finished the word treasure before ever-vigilant Jerry clapped a hand over his mouth. Thanks to Reader Attack for the 100-point reward. They'd become campus celebrities overnight. Everyone stared when they walked by. If anyone overheard them talking about Gryffindor's treasure, it would be trouble. Ron leaned in and whispered conspiratorially, "We were talking about treasure last night. What do you reckon Gryffindor's treasure holds?" Legend says he was a great adventurer, traveled all over, battled loads of dangerous things, knew tons of dueling spells. He must have left piles of good stuff for future students, right? Jerry grinned. "I don't ask for much. At least 100, no 80 galleons?" Harry had to remind him. There weren't any galleons back then. Ah, then gold then, I'm not picky. Ron and Jerry's heads were full of nothing but the word treasure. All morning, they couldn't go 3 sentences without bringing it up, sneaking glances and whispering like schoolboys about a secret hoard. If the diary hadn't been destroyed, Ted would have wondered whether Tom had taken over him again. By dinner, they were already arguing about how they'd spend the money. The rest of the year was curious too, so they all went to their secret base, an abandoned classroom, to plot. The Sorting Hat had said Gryffindor's secret is hidden behind Slytherin, so they concluded they had to find Slytherin first. Did Slytherin leave any portraits or something? Hermione asked, thinking ahead. The others thought for a moment and shook their heads. Harry turned to Neville. Weren't you in the Slytherin common room that Christmas? Was there a portrait of him there? He meant the night they took Polyjuice Potion to get information from Malfoy. Neville and Jerry both shook their heads. They'd been too nervous and focused on what they were stealing to notice who was painted on the walls. Unlike the other 3 founders, Slytherin seemed to have left no usual image. Gryffindor and Hufflepuff had portraits, Ravenclaw a bust, but Slytherin nothing. Then Hermione's face lit up. The Chamber of Secrets. Out in the open, there were no pictures of Slytherin at Hogwarts, but deep in the chamber, there was a huge statue of him. The statue had a famously pompous password, "Speak to me, the greatest of the founders." A bit of a show-off, though it pretended otherwise. Let's go, hurry, Ron urged, afraid someone else would beat them to it. He'd even sworn in the hospital wing never to go back into that underground chamber, because he'd broken his leg there once. Going back seemed like tempting fate. They found the girls' lavatory again. It hadn't been completely sealed. Maybe Dumbledore had never meant to shut it off entirely. When Slytherin built the chamber, perhaps he intended it as a refuge in dire times. Dumbledore might have left it intact for that reason. They entered with far lighter hearts than the last time. Neville used Parseltongue to open the big stone door, and the braziers in the hall flared to life just as they had before. The magic wasn't gone, even if the basilisk was. The huge snake-shaped sculptural motifs had been restored, probably by Dumbledore and his staff, and the chamber itself looked cared for. They went straight to the Slytherin statue. It was really a massive bust, 4 or 5 meters tall. Ron and Jerry barreled straight to the statue's backside. "Hey, come look! I found something!" Jerry shouted. Ted half laughed. "I was still building the atmosphere, and you've already found it?" Carved into the stone behind the statue, at about knee height, were a row of inscriptions, crude, like the sort of graffiti you'd find at a tourist site. "The Chamber of Secrets built by Slytherin is very good. I like it very much. I heard he often gave extra lessons to students here. Now that he's gone his own way, this place is mine. He gave extra lessons. I'll leave good things for students. Do you want my treasure? If you want it, you can have it all. Go find it. I've put all the treasures there. Go find Sir Cadogan, my dear students. Yours lovingly, Gryffindor. Left. Please refer to action's tone when resurrecting teammates." Ted squinted at the messy handwriting and at the silly inscription, and couldn't help having doubts. Was this really Gryffindor's? His hand seemed appallingly untidy for a great man. And the tone, were great men really that similar in their cheeky remarks? Ted found himself imagining Gryffindor with a swaggering treasure hunter's grin. When he told tales at school, he avoided things like One Piece, mainly because he didn't want the younger students getting rebellious ideas about becoming Somali pirates. Harry and Ron weren't bothered by Ted's mental theatrics. They high-fived and bounced with excitement. Hermione used a spell to shrink the words and copy them onto parchment. Ted poured cold water over their enthusiasm. "Hey, calm down. How do you know what treasure even means here? Who knows who Sir Cadogan is?" They quieted down. Right, no actual treasure in sight yet. Ted moved in front of the statue so the group wouldn't all be staring at Slytherin's lower half. "If you ask me, Gryffindor's treasure is probably still far off," he said, "but Slytherin's treasure might be right in front of us." They all fell silent, looking at him. "Slytherin's treasure?" Hermione said slowly. "Where?" "Right in front of you." Ted pointed at the statue's mouth. The mouth was a huge opening, nearly 1.5 meters across, that could only be opened with Parseltongue. It was the same place the basilisk had crawled through. The chamber hadn't been just a lair for a single monster. It had been where Slytherin taught advanced students certain dark arts. His descendants, the Gaunts, had altered and maintained parts of it over the generations, and a lavatory had been built over the entrance to keep it hidden. If Slytherin hid anything in the school, the belly of this chamber would be the most logical place. Only an heir could open it, and the entrance was guarded by his pet snake. It was the ideal spot for hoarding valuables. Gryffindor had probably guessed that and left a teasing clue here for an old rival. Neville shuffled forward, but looked like he'd rather melt into the floor. He didn't want any part of Slytherin's treasure hunt. Before he could back away, Ron and Jerry grabbed his arms without a word and carried him to the statue. "What was the password again?" Ron asked. "Speak, Slytherin?" Jerry hazarded. "No, that's not it. There were more words," Harry said. They'd been too panicked the first time to remember it exactly. Hermione rolled her eyes and recited it clearly. "Speak to me, Slytherin, the greatest of the founders." Ron and Jerry guffawed. How can he be so full of himself? "Honestly," Jerry said, "I wouldn't have the nerve to say something like that out loud." Putting aside their mockery of an ancient founder, Neville took a breath and spoke the password. The statue's mouth opened once more. "What do we do? Climb in?" Ron peered into the dark hole, but seeing nothing made him jittery. The idea of squeezing into Slytherin's mouth sent a shiver down every one of them. 195. Slytherin's Path. Ted pulled a small red and white ball from his pocket. This Pokeball was much smaller than the one Hermione had seen before, the one that had held Chicken Bro. He had optimized this one. It was now smaller than a fist. Ted's inspiration had mainly come from the undetectable extension charm, the same kind of powerful magic Newt Scamander used to expand a whole menagerie into a suitcase in the films. Ted had only simplified the interior. Instead of a vast zoo, the interior space in his devices was about the size of a modest garden. This particular ball was even smaller, about the size of a table, and inside it contained a neat little hamster nest. Under his friend's curious gazes, the Pokeball opened and a bewildered white mouse scampered out. Well, it was a magical white mouse, which made it a fantastic beast of a sort. Ted grinned and, with exaggerated affection, called it Rat Brother. "Hey, Rat Brother, go see if there's anything in there," he instructed. The mouse twitched its whiskers, seemed to nod, and darted straight into the gaping mouth of Salazar Slytherin's statue. Ted closed his eyes and synced with Rat Brother's perspective. As expected, the mouse's view was limited. Rats don't see far, and everything looked low and somewhat distorted. A moment later, the mouse paused and sniffed. It found signs of recent human presence, and then scurried past a patch where a huge shed scale lay on the ground, probably where the basilisk had slept long ago. The walls nearby showed abrasions and scuff marks. Rat Brother kept going and soon arrived at a room-like space. It climbed onto a table and peered up at rows of bookshelves. "All clear for now. Let's go in and take a look," Ted said. He cast a simple safety helmet charm over himself and the others, bent down, and entered the chamber first. The narrow corridor should have carried carvings or murals, but centuries of the basilisk's presence had worn everything smooth. 1,000 years does that. The corridor opened up into a massive, surprisingly bright space, obviously extended by spatial magic. The interior was far larger than the statue's exterior suggested, but it felt different from ordinary extensions. It was a huge, multi-level hall with the first and second floors visually integrated. Tall bookshelves lined the surrounding walls, crammed with scrolls and ancient tomes. Serpent-shaped lampstands mounted on the walls burned with an eternal cold flame that never guttered, making the room glow as if by day. In the center of the hall sat an extra-long laboratory table littered with old glass apparatuses. The liquids had long since evaporated, leaving blackened residue or powder. Whatever Salazar Slytherin had been experimenting on here, time had already done its worst. "Everyone, stay put. I'll check upstairs," Ted said, and went up the staircase to inspect the second level. A row of doors stood unlocked. Behind them were shelves, sealed jars, extended cages, and other storage spaces. Whatever had occupied them before, now most of it lay to dust. Ted picked up a massive skull of some unknown beast, and as soon as his fingers touched it, the thing crumbled into the texture of a weathered biscuit. The chamber was connected to the castle itself, which supplied the magic needed to maintain the space. That connection may also explain how Ravenclaw discovered the chamber being built. The Room of Requirement can act like an administrator's override. But while the chamber's architecture had been preserved by the castle's sustaining enchantments, the potions, specimens, and many stored materials from a millennium ago had not survived. By the time Tom Riddle, later Lord Voldemort, entered, most of the fragile stuff was already gone. Even inheriting the chamber didn't leave him flush with resources. He still had to scrape by after graduation, doing nocturne alley work for a while. It was almost pitiable. After Ted examined the first-floor shelves more closely, he had little doubt that young Tom had taken away the most vital pieces of Slytherin's research, large portions on bloodline modification and many dark arts tomes. When Tom was accused after Myrtle's death, he never dared reopen the chamber. Some of his bloodline modification notes, left in the Room of Requirement storage, eventually influenced Professor Quirrell. Quirrell's own stray ventures into the Albanian forest and his tentative steps into academia last year can be traced back to paths like that. Actions, it seemed, always produced consequences. Faced with walls of brittle scrolls, old books, and arcane manuscripts, the little wizards hesitated for a moment. Ted took charge. He would quickly scan and copy the contents, then sort and catalog them. They set to work organizing what Salazar Slytherin had left. Ted suspected Slytherin hadn't intended to abandon anything world-shattering. He'd left behind collected research, backups for the school. The most crucial parts on bloodline modification and his notorious dark arts experiments had likely been taken by Tom Riddle. Even so, the surviving materials still represented a massive trove of knowledge, arguably more varied than what Ravenclaw had left. Ravenclaw had simply left her office behind. She hadn't left a systemized archive. Slytherin's interests spanned ancient runes, magical zoology, bloodline modification and creation, biomimicry of fantastic beasts, and even ancient magic. He had already begun to lay out a magic system and to investigate the very origins of magic. Slytherin posited that magic stemmed from the souls of creatures, or from pseudo-souls, places or things that possessed consciousness. With prolonged use, magic could become engraved into a bloodline and be inherited. That, he thought, explained why many first-generation Muggle-born wizards could be astonishingly talented. They themselves were the wellspring of a new bloodline. Early wizardry, he argued, had arisen by imitating abilities found in fantastic beasts, other magical beings, or natural phenomena. Wizards longed to replicate those powers, and so similar magics developed. For example, the Horcrux was conceived from studying the abilities of some dark arts entities. The alchemy's capacity to grow and shrink, some species' capacity for mental probing that resembled legilimency, weather phenomena giving rise to freezing or storm magic, these were all clues. I call it biomimetic magic, Slytherin had written. Perhaps this is what following nature truly means, learning from all things. He even experimented on humans, trying to make wizards inherently possess certain beast-like abilities, not learned spells, but innate traits. They were dangerous, unethical experiments. While many of Slytherin's ideas were thought-provoking and valuable, Ted couldn't accept them wholesale. They were a warning as much as they were insight. Ted whispered to himself as he thumbed through a stack of scrolls. This is enough to keep us busy until at least 5th year. Ron, standing nearby, made a face. 5th year? I thought you meant forever. Ted smiled. Don't romanticize the old simply because it's old. If that were the case, then ancient ape men would be the strongest. Modern magic has advantages. Spells and techniques refined over centuries can be learned far more efficiently now because we build on the shoulders of giants. He waved his wand casually. And some of Slytherin's research is just too cruel for us. There's a reason he's remembered as a dark wizard. We don't need to take on that part. If given a choice, Ted mused, he'd rather study the legacies of Ravenclaw or even Gryffindor or Hufflepuff than follow Slytherin's path. It wasn't his way. He made a mental note to run personality and psychological tests on himself and the others once they returned home, to make sure the dark leanings in the texts hadn't rubbed off. After only an hour or so of copying and organizing the material, he'd already felt some change. He'd gained Bloodline Modification plus 3 levels, Fantastic Beasts plus 2 levels. The effects had come unnervingly fast. He'd only skimmed, he hadn't dwelt on the nasty bits. Salazar Slytherin's legacy was potent. Ted didn't want to dive any deeper for now. Researching groundbreaking, morally gray magic before he was ready would be like trying to tackle advanced research before finishing basic training. Reckless and liable to mess with one's head. Willpower shaped magic, and magic reshaped temperament. He saved the last page and grinned inwardly at his book friend Chiunjin Yue for the 200-point bonus. Thank you. Slytherin himself, or rather the spirit of his time, had been brutal. Looking over the experimental designs in the chamber, Ted found some of them downright cruel. If wizards of the present saw them, they'd be horrified. "These things are too dangerous," he said. "We'll filter them. Take what's useful for learning and leave the rest. A comprehensive study is impossible. Much of it is unusable." His little wizards agreed. The bookshelves were filled with material so dreadful that even skimming a few pages made them want to stop. Some descriptions were enough to make a person feel sick. Even looking at them felt wrong. Hermione glanced about nervously and whispered, "Should we leave these here?" "What if the professors seal the entrance soon?" Ron murmured, worried. Ted thought that total closure was unlikely, though easy access like this certainly wouldn't last. Maybe Dumbledore would treat the chamber as a temporary refuge or a fallback. Schools like Hogwarts had accumulated hidden passages and secret rooms over 1,000 years. One more entryway was no great loss. "We can make the Room of Requirement into our base," Ted suggested. "The Room of Requirement?" Harry breathed. Once Ted mentioned it, the secret was out. His little wizards promptly scolded him. Why hadn't he told them sooner? "We'd live there from dawn till dusk," Hermione complained. "I was afraid you'd make it a mess," Ted admitted. "And there's a diadem in there. If you touched it, you'd be in trouble." He set a binding charm in motion. The 6 of them signed a hastily drafted magical contract and swore, before the Ravenclaw chamber's door, to keep the place secret. They intended to borrow a sliver of Hogwarts magic and create a private base for just the 6 of them. This time, it would be a real secret base, not an abandoned classroom. Once set up, not even the headmaster could snoop inside. Ted had obtained a lot of information from the Ravenclaw chambers, diary records about the school's construction and the spells that bound it, so channeling a little of Hogwarts magic wasn't difficult. Professors already used the school's authority in small ways, running clubs, controlling minor wards. Ted simply bypassed the official channels and applied through a back door. From then on, like Ravenclaw's own chamber, the entrance through the Room of Requirement would respond only to those 6. "All right, that's enough," Ron complained weakly as the girls began decorating. Since they'd applied for the base, Hermione and the other girls set to work, arranging shelves, hanging pictures, placing vases. After an hour, they were still fussing. Ron and the others were exhausted. "A few bookshelves, some tables, and a sofa would have done," he grumbled. "Why sculptures, flowers, paintings, porcelain vases? They're taking forever." Ted, meanwhile, had already picked out the material they could study and stocked the shelves. He didn't just take from Slytherin, there were Ravenclaw texts too. 2 large bookcases held ancient runes alone. For anyone normal, reading them all would take a year or 2. Elective courses started next year, so now was the perfect time to preview rune studies. He also added material on the evolution of spells and some less extreme ancient magic, spells that differed from the modern system and might have unexpected effects. The difficulty level was high, but the possibilities were tempting. For half a day, everyone buzzed with excitement over their secret base. It wasn't until dinner that Hermione suddenly asked, "Did we forget about Gryffindor's treasure?" Only then did the Gryffindor 4 remember. Right, how could they forget their founder? With only a few days before the holidays, it was unlikely they'd get to it this year. "Think we can apply to stay at school?" Ron asked hopefully. "Don't be ridiculous," Harry snapped. "Students aren't allowed to stay over the summer." "But going home is boring," Ron protested. "I could eat chicken legs every day at Hogwarts and not have to put up with home. And I want to keep studying with everyone. I've learned almost nothing this year." Jerry clapped him on the shoulder. "My mum says setbacks make you smarter, just not richer." Ron brightened for a moment and then rolled his eyes. Thanks for the reminder. I'm getting myself a proper wand as soon as the holidays start. At the very least, we should use these next few days to investigate Sir Cadogan, Hermione suggested. Ted pulled a book from the shelf. I've already looked him up. Sir Cadogan's supposed to be a knight from Merlin's time, rumored to be one of the Knights of the Round Table. They all grabbed the book and read. After a while, they exchanged puzzled looks. He's older than the school, Harry said, throwing the book down. Where would we even find him? Might as well go look for Merlin. Most likely, Sir Cadogan was a portrait or statue kept in the castle. Gryffindor wouldn't scatter clues all over the country. He was almost certainly still within Hogwarts walls. The next morning, breakfast interrupted, Owls delivered the Daily Prophet to the students. The front page banner read, "Shocking! Hogwarts' Great Change." Ted felt a prickle of recognition. The piece claimed to be a full account of the Chamber of Secrets incident, but read more like sensational storytelling than journalism. Rumor and conjecture swelled to create a tense, thriller-like narrative. The article hinted, without naming names, that Dumbledore had played an unpleasant role. It even claimed nearly 10 students had been attacked and petrified. 5 might be described as nearly 10, only in the loosest sense. The whole thing ended with a sarcastic flourish. It was unmistakably the work of the sort who chased headlines and sold scandal. Ted flipped to the byline. By Rita Skeeter, special correspondent. Rita Skeeter could stir things up. After reading it, many of the little wizards felt that this year had been unusually dangerous. A few of the sharper ones sensed something off in the article, but couldn't quite say what. Ted, however, wondered who would have the motive to attack Dumbledore publicly. Dumbledore was the most respected wizard in Britain and a figure of global renown. He'd been low-key recently, but his standing remained. It didn't make sense to pick a fight with him. Could it be the pureblood faction led by Lucius Malfoy? Unlikely. Lucius had been careful since the diary incident and had even accepted being removed from the school board without causing a scene. Rita Skeeter wouldn't have targeted Dumbledore without being pushed by someone with deeper interests. Ted decided not to interfere directly. Keeping Dumbledore occupied with a public controversy could be useful. Having someone watch him closely wasn't necessarily unwelcome. The holidays were near, and Ted had a small gift for Hagrid, a moving basilisk figurine, intended to cheer him after his unpleasant time in Azkaban. Hagrid took it in both huge hands and gaped. "Oh my goodness, look at it! How cute it is!" Ted frowned and said, "Mate, you shouldn't keep that." 197. Another school year ends. Finally, it was time for the holidays. At the year-end feast, Headmaster Dumbledore, uncharacteristically, gave a long speech. He opened with a rare self-criticism, admitting that as principal he had failed to protect his young students from the monster in the Chamber of Secrets and that the failure made him feel unfit for the post. He acknowledged all the newspaper reports and said he would do his part in the years he had left in office. He even hinted that in a few years he would begin to relinquish his titles and step away from his duties. The idea of Dumbledore retiring sent a ripple of worry through students and professors alike. Of course, he quickly assured everyone he could hold on for a few more years, calming them again. It felt like a deliberate play, show some weakness, then withdraw in order to advance. If Dumbledore truly retired, the whole magical world would be shaken, and whoever was pulling the strings in the newspapers would think twice before acting. He went on to reminisce about the hard times and the joys he'd seen at the school, urging students to be proactive and to carry on the proud traditions of the four houses. Difficulties and hardships cannot defeat us. After the two celestial conjunctions, we will stand firm through these great changes and build a harmonious, stable magical world together. No one had ever heard Dumbledore speak so plainly before. What message lay behind his words, and for whom was it intended? Nobody could say. It was holiday time, and the students were happy. Ted sang 3 songs in a row, The Sound of Silence, Try Everything, and Orange Ocean's Summer Shosetsu, then bowed gracefully to his classmates as cheers erupted. After 3 numbers, both teachers and students agreed, "I declare you the strongest singing wizard." After that meal, the holidays would start the next day. The school year was finally over. When they returned, they would be third years. The next morning, the children waved goodbye to the headmaster and professors and climbed into the straw-drawn carriages. They passed through a bustling Hogsmeade Ted and his friends would be allowed to visit next year, and made their way to the train station. The Hogwarts Express, having seen off generations of witches and wizards, was already waiting. On the train, the children were loud with excitement, swapping holiday plans and promising to keep in touch for gatherings over the break. Eventually, exhaustion took them, and they slept in the carriage. Ted sighed. Another year gone. It had flown by. He used the ride to inventory what he'd gained over the last year. Ted Epiphany level, 6th level wizard, 4th level mind mage experience pool, 17,014 points. Attributes, values in parentheses are bonuses from equipment. Different items have separate bonus caps. Strength 5, +1 wristband. Constitution 5, +2 Philosopher's Stone. Agility 5, +1 spiderweb boots. Intelligence 7, +2 Spirit Crystal Servant. Perception 7, +1 wand, +2 Spirit Crystal Servant, +1 stun ring. Spirit 15, +2 Philosopher's Stone, +3 Spirit Crystal Servant. Charm 7, luck. Talents, Otherworld Knowledge, gold. Study God, purple. Heartbeat sound, red. Skills, Magic Power level 6, +1 wand, +2 Philosopher's Stone. Magic Resistance level 3, Magic Penetration level 1. Spell level 5, +1 wand. Mind Power level 5, Mental Resistance level 3, Transfiguration level 4, Potions level 3, Prophecy level 1, Herbology level 2, Dark Arts. Level 6, Magical Creatures level 6, Bloodline Modification. Level 5, Ancient Runes. Level 1, Alchemy level 1, +1 Philosopher's Stone. Magic Cooking level 2. Magic, Selected Spells. Sectum Sempra, level 5, Eye Disease Curse level 5, Memory Charm, level 5, Scouring Charm. Level 5, Frost Nova modified. Level 4, Ice Arrow. Level 4, Water Making Spell modified. Level 4, Arcane Wisdom. Level 3, Safety Helmet Charm. Level 2, Magic Evocation. Level 1, Magic Activation Level 1. Psionics, Memory Palace, Spirit Crystal Servant, Concealed Thought, Mental Encouragement, Mind Theft, Appraisal, Reading, Charm Art, Illusory Sound Spell, Message, Impersonation Spell, Chameleon Skin, Mental Spike, Emotion Provocation, Pets, Ansu, Parker, Chicken Bro, Big White Horse Cabbage, Rat Brother. By investing experience, Ted had pushed Sectum Sempra and the Eye Disease Curse to level 5. His memory charm had been sharpened under Professor Lockhart's instruction. He had also modified and fused many spells, experimenting to combine effects and invent new magic. Frost Nova was one such hybrid, tried in different strengths and applications to make it more versatile. He had borrowed a method of creating magical spring water from Azeroth and integrated it into his water-making spell, producing spring water that retained magical restoration properties for a long time, excellent for both drinking and potion brewing. He'd combined several protective and auxiliary charms into the Safety Helmet Charm, which could be customized with extra effects and adjusted on the fly. It was one of the most advanced spells he'd developed so far. There was also Magic Evocation, a short burst spell to restore magic power, derived from mage evocation knowledge in Azeroth. Magic Activation temporarily boosted magic power level, borrowed from Otherworld knowledge, the way of the great Ank's Magic Nourishment, a druid specialty. Speaking of Otherworld knowledge, Ted had gained a lot in the past year, especially the red quality, Doist knowledge. That knowledge didn't directly boost his stats, but it encompassed so much that it would benefit him forever. Blue quality texts like Druid Transformation Research and Alchemy Notes of Master Alchemist Baldurin were also invaluable. The former guided transformational paths, the latter contained a vast trove of alchemical formulas. If he decoded and localized them, he could pass as an alchemy master. Add the Item Creation Specialty Book Green, and his ability to craft magical items would expand considerably. Ted planned to study alchemy intensively over the holidays. Then, when school resumed, he might finally be able to equip a full set of 6 divine items. Even his later magic cooking skill had grown beyond basic alchemy, much to his own amusement. He wasn't a foodie, but the techniques were useful. As for bloodline cultivation and magical creatures, well, that was a long story. Ted hadn't intended to go that route, but Professor Quirrell's influence and Slytherin's leftover materials pushed him along it anyway. Magical creatures level 6 and bloodline modification level 5. He wasn't far behind Professor Quirrell. Add dark arts level 6, and he could jokingly call himself a mini Quirrell. With otherworld texts like Official Trainer Pokemon Cultivation Manual Green and Otherworld Reincarnated Slime Green, he could even claim authority in the field of magical beasts. Life was unpredictable. The express train swayed for half a day, then arrived in London in the afternoon. On platform 9 3/4, parents filled the station. Though many students had left early and the number of departing students was smaller than in past years, a lot of parents had come to pick up their children. Almost every family sent 2 or 3 people. Anxiety hung in the air. This year had not been peaceful. The Chamber of Secrets had opened, students had been attacked, and even Dumbledore had seemed unable to contain the chaos. Newspapers had painted terrifying pictures, as if Hogwarts might be shut down. Though it was announced that the chamber had been found and sealed and the monster killed, parents remained worried. Now that the holidays had started, they poured in to fetch their safe children. Seeing their kids unhurt, many parents finally relaxed. Ted noticed several non-human parents. 2 very short, round gnomes stood close together, Clara's parents. Gnomes were cuter than goblins, more childlike and oddly endearing. Goblins, by contrast, often made one reach for a wand. To Ted's surprise, after Clara said something and pointed, the gnome couple bustled over. "Student Ted Epiphany," the gnome father said, earnest and a little breathless. "Thank you for closing the Chamber of Secrets." It turned out to be a public thank you. Dumbledore had made Ted and his friends' deeds known, and many people were whispering, "Is that Ted? Thanks to those children." Jerry and Ron puffed out their chests with pride, while Neville blushed and hid behind his grandmother. 198. Salted Fish Net Upgrade. Many students and parents on the platform were watching the 6 of them. Ron and Jerry grinned at the attention. Neville wasn't used to it yet. He had been noticed like this since he was a child, but now the gazes on him felt different, friendlier, warmer, and it relaxed him. In the past, people looked at him with suspicion and scrutiny. Even excitement had made him feel pressured. Now he could stand it a little more. He'd earned some confidence from his strength and contributions. The younger witches and wizards whispered to their parents about Ted, how he was always top of the class, a true academic powerhouse, how he livens up every holiday, and how his singing introduced them to songs they'd never heard before. Ted had become the other child everyone wished their own kids would be. Parents began urging their children to make friends with the 6. Ted, meanwhile, had plans for the summer. Life's short. Why not be a little reckless? Before the holidays, he'd already set things in motion. For one, he was opening the Xianyu website, but he'd made some adjustments. He needed a physical base, too, a small shop for concentrated appraisals and auctions every Saturday morning, with an online forum and information exchange on weekdays. He found a tiny shop not far from Mr. Giggs's apothecary. When he asked Mr. Giggs about the price, Giggs told him it was 840 galleons. "That's a bit high," Giggs said. "It's a front on Diagon Alley, but it's really small." "Small doesn't matter," Ted said, "but 840 is a little steep. Think we can haggle?" "You really going to buy it? Do you have the money?" "Almost." "So shampoo sells that well?" Giggs chuckled. "I'll help you negotiate, but with that area, you won't be able to do much." Ted had expected that. "Do you think I could apply for permission to use the undetectable extension spell?" he asked. Giggs frowned. "Not easy, unless you have ministry connections. Even if your application is approved, finding someone to cast the charm will cost. Wizards who do spatial extension charge a lot." Ted put his plan into motion anyway and contacted Arthur Weasley. "Mr. Arthur, I want to apply to the ministry for permission to use the undetectable extension spell. Can you tell me how it's done?" Arthur was delighted. "Oh, that's simple. My friend old Jimmy is in the misuse of magic office. It's easy to handle. Are you making a spatial trunk or suitcase?" "No, I want to buy a small shop and expand the space." "Buying a shop? Buying what?" Arthur sputtered, overwhelmed at the idea of Ted becoming a boss. He panicked for about 10 seconds and then returned to his usual philosophy. Money comes and goes. Enjoy life. He and Molly weren't savers. They spent. They also raised enterprising sons like Ron and the twins. Ted scraped together the funds. He'd sold some gold and parts of his shares from Pimple Free and the smoothing shampoo venture and paid the asking price. The shop was tiny, 2.5 meters wide and 4.5 meters deep. In the Muggle world, it might be a food stall. In the Wizarding world, Ted saw potential. Through Arthur's help at the Ministry, he obtained permission to use the undetectable extension spell. But he didn't hire anyone to cast it. He did the work himself. Ted spent 3 days transforming the tiny facade into a flagship store. The front was barely 2 meters wide, but the interior opened into over 500 square meters. Most wizards couldn't manage that. Even with permission, they'd need to hire specialists, and most could only expand their bags or suitcases a few times over. Ted had spent experience points to raise his undetectable extension spell, absolutely difficult to master, to level 3. He supplemented it with evocation techniques and potion replenishments and created the large shop in 3 days. He'd even entertained the idea of spending 2,000 experience points to push the spell to level 5 and turn the place into a 3-story villa, but he convinced himself to stay modest. Saturdays in Diagon Alley started to feel like market day. Wizards with leisure time flocked straight to Ted's secondhand home. The sign outside announced appraisals and auctions every Saturday morning. During the week, the shop ran as an online hub for listings and discussion. Ted hired house elves who were off from other duties to make the snacks and serve. He paid wages, after all, rather than treating them as unpaid staff. House elves had previously had no assets of their own. Ted wanted them to have wages, too. They tended to buy odd things, bed sheets, pillowcases, curtains, spices, but their choices were their own. Among the staff were Dobby and Jerry. Dobby, now free after being released by Lucius, had been an anomaly among house elves, one of the few eager to leave his old life. Ted hired him at 6 galleons a week, 25 galleons a month, which didn't match Dumbledore's rumored 10 galleons a week, but it was respectable. Having a well-dressed house elf as a waiter gave second-hand home a certain prestige. First-time visitors were often surprised. Visitors bought breakfast on the spot and sat at small round tables, eating and talking about the items up for auction or the notices on the bulletin board. The board was a chaotic, colorful mix. Local dating notices. Gentlemen of Great Britain, I sincerely seek friendship. Interested parties, meet me at the Big Bird Turning Bar. Address. Replies, me, I'm from South Africa. No dark ones. Damn it. Spell advice. I used a swelling spell in the wrong place and it's been 2 days. I can't get my trousers on. Help. Urgent. I'm asking for a friend. See a healer immediately or you'll have complications. Don't ask how I know. I have to go to the Big Bird Turning now. White essence with borneol and mint, chilled, then add murtlap essence and apply evenly up and down repeatedly. That helps a bit. Don't ask how I know. I'm off to St. Mungo's for a shift. Broomstick enthusiasts recruiting. Rumor. Randolph Budmore's new firebolt is going into mass production. Old news. Heard the Irish national Quidditch team ordered 7. Accelerates to 150 miles per hour in 10 seconds. Its braking system is insanely effective. What's the price? I'll sell my soul. Conservatively, over 500 galleons. As expected, not for a poor wizard like me. I'll stick to modifications, seeking a magical ash core. Careful, don't get caught by the Ministry. Ted's second-hand home had become more than a shop. It was a market, a social hub, and a little ecosystem of odd services and advice. Between the auctions, the notice board, the snacks, and the gossip, it was exactly the kind of summer Ted had planned for. Chaotic, profitable, and a lot of fun. $1.99, Longbottom's stressed granny. There were even cooking recipes being shared. Pig blood curry pineapple pudding pizza. How can one dish offend several countries? The headline read. That ridiculous recipe was widely denounced by a lot of wizards who demanded it be taken down. They complained that even if Great Britain ate mashed potatoes every day, it didn't deserve such an insult. An Italian wizard touring Britain declared it an affront to Italy's national dignity and threatened to send a diplomatic inquiry to the British Ministry of Magic. He demanded the author apologize to pizza itself. Ted didn't care. Controversy meant traffic, and traffic was everything. Besides, the recipe had been posted by an Indo-British environmental wizard who was assigned male at birth but identified as female, one of their own. In a few years, their community claimed The Prime Minister might even be Indian. For them, the true cultural influence of Britain lay in India. There were travel notes, too. Rumors of villa in a red light district in Spain. Ted promptly blocked half the details, especially the address. Within days, there were nearly 100 anonymous replies. Ted posted a short warning. Let them take that discussion private. Don't go getting yourselves sent to Azkaban. I am not participating in this discussion. All consequences rest with the poster. The beer and banter threads continued unabated. Samir, guess what I saw in the States this time? What? Aurors and purifiers from the American Ministry of Magic brawling, right out in no-mage territory. They didn't try to avoid muggles? Right in front of them. Word is some descendant of the purifiers who was a squib suddenly showed special powers, wandless magic. Both sides made a huge fuss. Similar tidings from around the world flowed in constantly and were dutifully recorded by the spirit crystal servant Parker, disguised as a wall ornament. Muggle information exchange was highly developed. After all, it was 1992, and Windows 95 would be on the market in a few years, while the wizarding world's communication remained closed and slow. Foreign news could take a week to arrive, and even then, few learned it. Most ordinary witches and wizards read only the Daily Prophet and a few entertainment papers. Unless the ministry spoke, they stayed in the dark. In truth, a lot of strange things had been happening in Britain. The ministry and the Muggle authorities were busy suppressing stories. Unknown creatures had smashed into black markets and fought dark wizards. Strange magical beasts had appeared in Muggle mines and forced closures. Muggles were being murdered in baffling cases, Chamber of Secrets style, with no clues. Ancient artifacts in Muggle collections began showing magic and caused a stir. On the surface, the ministry seemed calm, but it was swamped. Fudge, the minister, had obtained a contract spell and used it to gag ministry employees. Anyone who slipped up would feel their tongue seize and be reported to headquarters. That's why it was been kept quiet. Last year, the Xianyu fan group had been mostly idle young wizards who strolled the streets with nothing to do. They'd bring small stools, sit for a day, drink tea, crack sunflower seeds, and cheer at whatever amused them. It was a way to pass the time. Now the user base of Secondhand Home had grown and diversified. Witches made up roughly a quarter to a third of users. They gathered in the Witch Forum that Ted had set up just for them. Female customers couldn't be ignored. There were knitting tips, household magic manuals, recipes for batch cooking, and guides to pest control. Ted copied many of the ideas from Muggle sources. The Muggle world was a treasure chest. Many small practical spells turned up that Ted had never heard of. This magic world wasn't as prolific as he'd thought. Wizards invented spells and kept them to themselves, and no one knew how many had been lost. There were threads on preparing 5 days' worth of meals on a Monday, and pre-made meal plans lifted from Muggle cookbooks. Lockhart teaches you how to get rid of household pests was promoted as a joke. Lockhart would be staying at St. Mungo's for some time, and his books had been quietly removed from shelves after some English-to-English translation scandals. There were threads on child rearing, too, terrifyingly casual suggestions about scolding, the stinging hex, and a transfiguration torture spell. As long as you didn't use Crucio, one poster argued, it wasn't illegal. Ted saw families coming to Secondhand Home like it was a community center. They arrived in the morning, neatly dressed, buy house elf pastries for breakfast, try the appraisal game, a guessing, almost gambling stall everyone loved, browse secondhand wares at the auction table, chat on the forum, then have lunch at Secondhand Home before dispersing to shop and finally return home. A lovely Saturday. Many of Ted's classmates had brought their parents in to support him. After a visit, they became regulars. Where else could you eat, drink, chat, and gossip online and in person all at once? If only they could find a bard to sing a few songs, it would be perfect. In the second week after the business model change, users topped 240 and the enlarged shop was already too small. Ted felt things slipping out of control. The British wizarding community was only just over 30,000 people, scattered across the country. Even in Diagon Alley, the busiest commercial street, the turnout was huge, 1% of the national wizarding population visiting every week. The profits weren't that massive compared to monopolistic enterprises, but the influence was enormous. like certain Muggle websites that never made much money but had huge traffic and a dedicated user base. That was the real value, and someone would notice. If growth continued, it was only a matter of time before someone tried to seize it by underhanded means. That would bring trouble. Last year, when the Xianyu site had been only a stall, a competitor, Borgin and Burks, had tried to stir trouble, but Ted had found a way to fan the flames and quiet them down. Now the business had grown, and its value was visible. He couldn't be sure who else it might attract. Ted needed to plan. He wasn't afraid of influence. He was on a path where power would come to him. If he grew older, he believed he could handle every wizard in Britain with a wand. For now, he wanted to stir things up and bring some change to the magic world. Better to pull in allies and share the benefits. One of those allies could be the Longbottoms. Neville's stern grandmother had once invited Neville to bring a guest. Ted decided to accept and visit. He hadn't expected such a reception. How grand was it? The gates of Longbottom Manor opened, and Neville's grandmother and great-uncle, dressed in their finest, greeted him. His grandmother's usual eagle-head helmet was replaced by a hat today. The welcome flustered Ted. He hadn't even announced his intentions. Did this demand such ceremony? He felt unnerved. But the stern grandmother offered no pressure. Instead, she was unexpectedly warm and straightforward, which put Ted at ease. "Ted, may I call you that? I want to thank you for looking after Neville," she said. Neville's grandmother had always worried for him. With Neville's great-uncle having no children, Neville was now the only heir of the Longbottoms. Worse, that heir was in many people's eyes the boy who lived. For years she had pressed Neville hard, not only out of discipline, but out of fear. Fear for how much time she had left, and dread that if she died, Neville would be vulnerable to the cruelties of the wider wizarding world. If that day came, she felt, Neville would probably only be able to rely on Dumbledore. Neville's grandmother didn't trust Dumbledore, not since her son and daughter-in-law joined the Order of the Phoenix, and not after they sacrificed themselves. If anything, her distrust had only grown. A woman in her 70s, born into one powerful family and married into another, she had spent decades exercising judgment and protecting her own. She had never been entirely comfortable with Dumbledore's methods. She did not deny his greatness, but she had seen enough of people to know that greatness could be cold, and that lofty reasons often hid crueler truths. She had little contact with him, and was not about to hand her grandson over lightly, even to the greatest white wizard of the century. Where she differed from Dumbledore, she matched Professor McGonagall. Augusta Longbottom had a warm, steady friendship with McGonagall, and she had worried over Neville all his life. His shyness, his timidity, the way he'd been overshadowed by tragedy. The title, The Boy Who Lived, carried honor, but it was also a heavy burden, and she had never been sure Neville could bear it. Only recently, under the patient influence of Ted and friends, had Neville begun to grow stronger and stand a chance of carrying that weight. He finally had comrades who would help him. She appreciated straightforwardness. Ted's frank conversations with her increased her trust. She didn't have to play any of the guessing games many of the older generation loved. He told her plainly the plan. Several respectable families would jointly run a place they called the second-hand home. When he explained how it would be managed, how responsibilities and reputations would be shared, Augusta was pleased and agreed. "If you'd said nothing," she told him, "I would have reminded you to be careful not to attract too much attention." Ted celebrated with the Longbottoms over a lavish meal, unexpectedly made by the Hogwarts kitchen, and before he left, he persuaded Augusta to buy Neville his own wand. Neville had been using his father's, and it was time he had one of his own. Ted and the others only learned the full story after the Chamber of Secrets business, when Neville comforted Ron about the loss of his old wand, and Ron blurted out that Neville had been using his father's wand. Ron's reaction was characteristically blunt. "Sad? Not at all. Let that cursed wand disappear from my memory. I never want to think of wands and slugs again. I'm getting a new one." From Longbottom Manor, Ted went on to 12 Grimmauld Place, the Black family home. He had traveled and learned much, from arcane lore to the many oddities of the otherworld, and yet the ancestral house still took him aback. It was a fortress of a house. Defenses layered upon defenses. Wards, ritual charms, alarm spells, both light and dark magics, wove together in a dazzling, complex lattice. Seen with arcane vision, it looked like a miniature galaxy, carefully ordered channels of power that made the whole place a single, impenetrable structure. No wonder the Order had used it as headquarters. It put even the Longbottom's defenses to shame. The Longbottoms relied largely on magical plants, creatures, and formations tied to a family token. The Burrow, by contrast, had its own eccentric protections, but should not be compared in terms of scale. Sirius Black himself was disarmingly casual. He greeted Ted like an old friend, a bear hug, an arm slung across shoulders, mischief in his smile. He rarely bothered with formalities, a few buttons of his shirt done up, a casual irreverence that made Ted feel like he'd stepped back into a youthful world. Madame Olivia, cultivated, gentle, dignified, soon chased Sirius off to change. Her quiet authority was one reason she held such a high place in Harry's esteem. Without her steadiness, Sirius's influence might have sent Harry wildly off track. Harry, who showed Ted around the house, pointed out the family portraits and, more awkwardly, the preserved heads of house elves hanging on the wall like trophies. "It's an old custom," he said with some embarrassment. "We don't do it anymore. We were going to take them down and bury them, but Creature insisted. He even said he wanted Sirius to preserve his head the same way when he dies, to show how faithfully he served." Creature was ancient, nearly 120 years old, and without the family's secret methods of preservation, an elf's head would not survive. The whole practice made Ted uneasy, but he took it as a grim slice of family history. Sirius was happy to lend the Black name to the second-hand home. In his view, it was merely borrowing a title. If he could spare the family name to spite distant relatives, lending it to young people he liked sounded even better. He didn't care about money, profit shares, or management. He was the archetypal generous, profligate heir who viewed such matters with a shrug. He regaled Ted with stories of the old gang, the spells they invented, the secret tools they made, the night excursions into the Forbidden Forest, the holiday teams, and the trouble they got into. There was a boy's sparkle still in his eye, a man who missed the reckless joy of youth. Sirius even asked, shyly, what Ted thought of Harry. Ted's answer was simple and firm. They were just friends. Sirius's sigh held both regret and relief. He had fancied things might be different. Ted's final stop was the Burrow. He wanted the Weasleys involved, not only for their rooted presence in the magical community, the red hair marking an old Celtic bloodline older than many great families, but because the family needed help. The Weasleys had been struggling since the start of term. The flying car incident had brought a rebuke and a fine that made hard times harder. Ted arranged a modest monthly stipend, 30 or 40 galleons, which would make a real difference for the children's clothes and schooling. At first, Arthur and Molly rejected the offer, refusing to feel like they were taking advantage of a younger person. Ted pointed out that other families involved were receiving funds too, and that it would be awkward if the Weasleys alone refused. Reluctantly, they accepted. He also invited a few other trusted allies. Giggs, Madame Purnell, who ran the beauty shop and was Ted's lover, and old Tom of the Leaky Cauldron. He didn't forget those who had helped or befriended him. Before he left, Ted sorted out Ron's wand buying. Ron had stubbornly put it off for weeks, unable to bear spending the money. He had earned nearly 10 galleons on his own during the crisis, from spitting slugs, selling amulets, and other odd jobs, and Dumbledore had arranged compensation for the loss of his wand after the chamber incident. That brought him close to 20 galleons, more than the Weasley household usually had on hand. Ron, fiercely protective, kept shouting, "No one can take my money. I'm not spending it all." Ginny crowed, "Bro, we're rich." Aunt Molly, ever practical, offered to keep the savings safe for him when you get a wife, which made Ron recoil. "I'm not marrying that thing," he protested. Molly's sharp ears had already caught wind that Ron planned to buy a wand. "Little Ronnie, where did you get the money?" she asked. Ron, flustered, muttered that it was his own, slugs, amulets, and Dumbledore's compensation. He stood firm that he would not fritter it away. When Molly reminded him not to be reckless, he nodded like a caught child and, muttering about Lockhart and other embarrassments, agreed to keep it safe. but vowed, loudly and repeatedly, that no one would take his money from him.